pronunciation right. So if I go through all your names, can you guys just tell me if I get it right or correct me if I get it wrong? Just nod your heads. All right, cool. So Josephine, Gu, Kulkarni, Lee, Sagrolakar, Uthumana, Pontes. I know Senator A wanted me to call her Senator A. And Senator Goldbeck. Did I get Williams? All right, yeah. And then Subramanian.
Oh, I believe I raised my hand to say that I was an AF in elderly care, but I have a negation.
I have to go take care of some house stuff. Not here at the house Congress stuff. So I'm going to assume, since I love you enough, that you know how to do this, and I don't need to sit here and watch you do this, right?
It's true.
Thank you.
We're gonna find out if not. Yeah, I'll text you, and then yeah, if anything happens, okay?
Okay, if you'll just text me an exact start time, that way I'll know. That would be great.
Okay. Yes,
thanks.
Can do.
Bye. Good luck, everybody.
Oh, also, I forgot to say that I do have a sponsor for ID law, so I can go either way or a sponsor. So if that helps anything with the split, I don't remember.
Okay, with that out there, I don't know if that helps anyone. I guess we'll find out in a little bit. It's 12:24. I'll get us. Nope, it's 2:24 for you all. Looking at mine. Add hours or subtract as you so see necessary. So in order to start at half past the hour, we're gonna get going. All right. Senator Gilbert, if you can remind us as soon as we start, though I should remember so I can text tab the official start time, that would be wonderful. All right, folks, ready? You got one more session. I remain the same, and all of our logistics do as well. The only two things that would be different about this session, one has to do with the very end, in which I will keep you to do leadership voting. Okay, and I'll talk more about that when we get there. But then the second just has to do with the change in faces. All right, so whereas A few minutes from now, Senator Gilbert will introduce himself for the judges because we're already done with presiding officer nominations. You have new judges. No, you're so excited. So we're going to hear from them now. Judges, you are more than welcome to, like I know Judge Henderson is going to do, go over paradigms. If not, and you're just like, I am a human, here I am, completely up to you. So with that, Judge Henderson, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. First, I want to say congratulations to everybody. Give yourself a little hand for being not only here right now, but also making it to nationals. I hope that obviously, because you're here, the tournament has gone quite well for you guys. And my paradigms are, and congressional debate is very different compared to every other type. It's not just like Lincoln Douglas or policy or anything like that, where it's one person going, one or two teams going up against each other. It's all of you guys. It's the entire chamber. I like to see well-constructed arguments that isn't just spread at me like I'm listening to a policy speech. And I really like to see creative and proper use of parliamentary procedure, not only from the competitors, but from the presiding officer as well. And then another just personal piece, as I say, if you do anything that involves the Constitution, just remember that the rules to the Constitution are different than the rules to passing an average bill. Besides that, that's all I have.
Thank you, Judge Henderson. Who is next on my screen? Judge Fairbanks, you're the next on my screen. Go ahead.
Hey, I'm Heather Fairbanks from Minnesota. I am a retired judge and coach of all types of debate. The only one that I still care to be involved with right now is Congress. So I'm excited to come in and just see the best of the best today. So I hope that you wow me. I think the best thing to do to feel good about the world is to be around young, smart people who are ready to get involved. So thank you for making my day a little brighter. You're all great speakers. That's how you got here. If you weren't, you wouldn't make it to this point. So the things that I am most likely going to be looking at in this round is going to be whether or not the speech that you're given is appropriate for the time it comes up in the round. I don't want to see a completely pre-written, like constructive style speech given in spot 12. I'm going to break you down for that. I do think that your position has to change as you go through the speaking order. I do think that it is a little bit harder to connect virtually. And so that means you need to try a little bit harder to stand out to me and to make it personal or personable. And then the biggest thing that I have always struggled with every year of congressional debate for probably the last 25 years is remembering everybody at the end. So whatever you can do to make you stand out and make me remember you as a person and as a speaker is going to be really helpful when I turn off this screen and have to enter in my numbers, because you're all great speakers. You all are going to have well-researched speeches. You're all going to blend together a certain amount. So I like a little bit of razzle dazzle. I like a little bit of wordplay, and I like good people. So please be excellent to each other and make it fun.
Thank you. And then Judge Owens.
Yeah, hi, I'm Judge Owens. I'm an assistant debate coach from Colorado. I competed at nationals in the Congress House, the Congress Senate, and extemp debate. I am just out of high school for a few years, so I'm like very, very young still and everything. But it's awesome, like, to see you guys competing still. And yeah, like Judge Fairbanks says, it makes my day a little brighter because you guys. Just like the youth is still so smart and everything, and you guys keep me young, I feel like, even though I'm like just out of high school. But yeah, super excited.
Awesome. And then with that, as long as Judge Fairbanks is okay over there, are you okay? Okay. Yeah, I know sometimes I have to like take a drink of water and I don't want everyone watching me. So all good.
I have a kid at home, so every once in a while they pop into the screen and they're not always dressed. So I am trying to be proactive.
No, I'll love it. All right. Senator Gilbert, your floor. Go ahead. I'm gonna go on mute.
All right, everyone. At a time of 2:30 Central Time, I call this session into order. Parley, you got the time now. All right, so real quickly, I'm just gonna go over some of my procedure. Here's my little spreadsheet. I'll get to that in a second. So for timing, you know the standard drill for online. We have color-coded cards. I have green at 2 minutes, yellow at 2:30, red at 2:55. At 3 minutes, I'm gonna flip it over just so you guys know when your official time has stopped. But of course, we do have to give you some grace. 3:05, I'll hold up 5 seconds, start counting down until 3:10, at which point I know we're online, so I will give you around 1.5 seconds just to account for lag. But I'm telling you now, it is not going to look good if you're hitting 3:08 plus. All right, so keep it short. We all want to get speeches in. For questioning, we are going to do direct. Pretty standard procedure, same as before. I'm going to hold up a card for 20 seconds. 25 seconds in, I'm going to start counting 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Look for my fist, and I'm going to call the next speaker. I know some presiding officers like to just type the name of the person who's going to speak next in the chat. I find that a little bit cumbersome because every once in a while, someone's going to throw up their card and they get the question. So I'm just going to keep it verbal, which means that you also have to do your due diligence to make sure you listen to me and you see my signals. Now I'm just going to direct you guys over to my little spreadsheet. Go over to the recency tab and you're going to see my precedence and recency chart. The preset recency is already set up and it's going to be reverse order for questioning as it was for last session. Over on the right side, you're going to see the questions. Under tab 0 is going to be the questioner recency. This little software is pretty neat because based off of this questioner recency, it's going to spit out all the way on the left on the questioning priority who gets the next question. So you guys feel free to pay attention to it, to call me out if I do make a mistake. We do want to make sure that everyone gets the questioning time they deserve. I won't hold you accountable to it. You guys should be holding me accountable. All right, just for some last housekeeping things concerning motions, such as motion to previous question, I want you guys to hold up your placard, make sure I can see it. I'll call you in between the speeches. For points of personal privilege to exit the chamber, keep it in the chat. You can drop it in. I prefer in between speeches. I'll try to get to it as much as possible, but I will only grant it in between speeches. With that being said, I think you guys know the rest. I don't really have to explain too much. I got over all the things that I'm required to. Are there any questions for me? All right. So with that being said, judges, are you all ready? Are we good to begin? All right, awesome. So with that, I'm going to recognize an author for the asylum bill. Are there any authors? All right, seeing none, I'm going to move to sponsors. Any sponsors for the asylum bill? We have to begin with the sponsor. I'm going to recognize Senator Josephy, unopposed.
I thank the chair for the judges that Senator Josephy, spelled Josephy, representing the New England district. Just give me a thumbs up whenever you're ready, and I'll begin. Great. Awesome, awesome. All right, I think that's it then. We're an app speech just for this. So I'll just pick the PO. Oh, and for the PO, just to check, you're okay with me timing myself, right?
Yeah, just make sure you're seeing me because we're going off my time.
All right, sounds good. And hey, in that case, I'll begin. President John F. Kennedy once said that everywhere immigrants have enriched and strengthened the very fabric of American life. Well, he's right then and he's right now. But no matter how pro-immigrant we have to be, or we have to acknowledge one crucial thing in today's debate, that no matter what our position is on immigration, there are glaring issues with our immigration system and public health policy that we have to change today. And to change those, affirm. But first, affirm to fix glaring problems within our border security that this bill directly addresses. Because when we see the numbers, we see a crystal clear picture that our border is in a state of a record crisis, with Forbes telling us in May of this year that the southern border crossings hit a record high just 2 months ago, with immigration agents apprehending upwards of 179,000 attempted migrants in the month of April alone. In fact, arrests at the border overall are up more than tenfold from this time last year, as Reuters tells us just last month. In other words, when we see the bigger picture on the border, we find a crystal clear outline that our border in terms of migrant crossings is being overwhelmed and overrun by migrants who we just don't have the capacity to handle, no matter how much we want them. And if we look beyond just total migrants, the picture gets even blanker, with the Washington Post telling us just last year that the southern border has seen a surge in crossings of children and teenagers, both alone and with families. Essentially, what this says is simple, that we have a crisis of profound magnitude at our southern border, with hundreds of thousands of migrants coming in, overwhelming our facilities and judicial system with no end in sight. Because no matter how much we want these migrants, we have to understand that we just lack the capacity to adequately process all of them. And that's where this bill comes in. Because by massively reforming our massively outdated immigration system to accommodate this massive surge in demand, we ensure that a surge doesn't become a crisis and that a crisis doesn't overwhelm us all. Affirm. But second, affirm to reduce the overcrowding of southern detention centers to prevent a public health disaster. Because as the New York Times tells us just last April, the overcrowded nature of ICE facilities from the surge that led to massive outbreaks of COVID-19 across the southern border early on in the pandemic cost us hundreds of lives and spread the virus to dozens of states and municipalities across the southern region. And this is due to the very nature of ICE facilities, with the nonprofit American Oversight telling us that the spread of COVID in ICE facilities on the southern border was directly due to the overcrowded and underfunded nature of these areas, alongside a pattern of secrecy that enabled ICE to hide the full extent of the outbreak. In essence, the derelict nature of our facilities on the southern border, coupled by a complete lack of coverage and accountability, enabled the spread of the most deadly pandemic in a century throughout our immigration centers. This is why fundamentally we need to pass this bill, because only through reforming our centers and immigration policy and ensuring that our immigration policy can adequately handle this massive surge in demand can we prevent another outbreak and public health disaster. Senators, the issue here is clear. As our border sees a surge in demand, our system needs to be able to accommodate it. Affirm.
Thank you for that speech time of 3 minutes and 10 seconds flat. All those who'd like to question, please raise your placards. We have 4 blocks. Right, starting off. Senator Uthimana.
I thank the chair. Senator Josephy, with this bill getting rid of the catch and release policy that's currently in place, wouldn't this just result in more detainings of immigrants at the southern border?
See, it does, but it also allocates billions of dollars to expand our facilities and ensure that we can actually accommodate this surge. And it also moves some of these detainees back into Mexico so that our facilities aren't the one that actually hold them, because right now, because it reinstates the MPP, and because it reinstitutes the MPP, and ensures that our
why shouldn't we care about the immigrants' dignity in this case? Isn't it indignifying these immigrants by just sending them back across the border if they're seeking asylum?
Senator A.
Thank you. So, Senator, in your speech, you claimed that the system is broken, quote unquote, right?
It's overwhelmed, yes.
Why? Right. So why would you fund the system that is broken systematically? It's not going to help anyone.
I'm not saying that the systematic issue is, broken. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have an immigration system. I'm saying that right now we lack the capacity, the funding, and the ability to adequately hold this massive surge in migrants. We need people to do that.
Fund ICE that inherently wants to deport people. How is that going to help immigrants in their case?
That's the Senator Gu.
What's the point of decreasing backlog and improving the quality of our detention centers if we just house them in Mexican ones?
Because with all due respect, Senator, we have to understand one hard truth, that if we put them in our centers right now, they're going to be in worse positions.
But Senator, that's why you advocate for the funding that we provide under today's legislation, and yet you want to move them overseas. What's the point of this maintenance?
It's not overseas. It's about 20 miles south of the border.
And yeah, not under United States regulation. That makes a huge difference.
They're actually meant to hold the people that they do, that aren't overcrowded.
But they don't hold them very well, do they?
Thank you. So 20 miles south of the border, what about the ACAs that you institute in Section D to Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala? Definitely not 20 miles away.
I mean, those play into the same issue too, right? The fundamental premise is that this is a way to reduce the massive overcrowding in our border that has led to public health issues, safety issues.
Right, but shouldn't the solution to
don't have the capacity to handle this? We finally have the capacity to ensure that we can hold all the migrants who come into our country.
Shouldn't the solution just be to improve our detention centers then, rather than send them overseas?
Time of the lab, questioners may be muted. All right, we're looking for a negation speaker now. Please raise your placard. All right, of those standing, it's going to go first to Senator Sagrolakar.
I thank the chair for the judges, Senator Sagrolakar. You can see how it's spelled there. Just a thumbs up when you're ready would be great. All right. In 1883, Emma Lazarus wrote an inscription on the Statue of Liberty that should ring through this chamber. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to break free. Today's AF advocacy remains in stark opposition to this proposition. As we move into this debate, let's set some standards for the round. The crux of this piece of legislation is Section 3, which means that there are many ways that either side can win the debate. We can show that the welfare of asylum-seeking children are worsened in, on net, sections A through E. I don't have time in this 3-minute speech to cover all the egregious mispractices of all of the sections, but let's take the most important of the 5 and get started. First, Section A provides $150 billion to immigration courts, but unfortunately, the AF misunderstands why the complexity of immigration law impedes success here. According to a Reuters investigation in October of 2017, because immigration law is so complex, when judges are asked to speed up the asylum process, they make proportionally more deportations, which means that throwing money at the centers won't have an impact unless we fundamentally change how the judges hear cases. Next, Section B holds refugees in Mexico until they can enter the United States. But this ignores 2 things. First, Senator Gu already brought this up in questioning. Why are we spending $150 billion trying to improve our detention centers in order to send them to Mexico later? But second, it ignores the fact that Mexico can also deport these undocumented immigrants. According to Delphine Skrank, for Reuters in June of 2019, when our detention centers came under increased pressure that year, we saw in response that undocumented immigrants sent by us to Mexican detention centers tripled, but they consistently lack government oversight. People in the centers have reported overcrowding, lack of food and water, and most horribly, frequent use of solitary confinement. But that's not even the worst part. Section D of Section 3 reinstates ACAs, or Safe Third Country Agreements, with the Northern Triangle, which, as the Wilson Center tells us in 2020, is the region in Central America with the most rampant organized crime that threatens civilians. In fact, the State Department's own Overseas Security Council said in 2019 that Guatemala, quote, remains one of the most dangerous countries in the world with an, quote, an alarmingly high murder rate. I cannot begin to fathom how the affirmative can reconcile the name Safe Third Country Agreement with the reality that it brings about in the Northern Triangle. This legislation removes the strongholds that give asylum seekers at least a chance to properly defend themselves against deportation. What use is our immigration system if it fails to provide refuge for those who need it most? Fail.
Thank you for that speech time of 3 minutes and 4 seconds. Questioners, raise your placards, 4 blocks. First, Senator Kulkarni.
Hi, Senator. So you raised concerns about why we're funding our own detention centers if we're going to just send migrants to Mexico, right?
Yes, that's one concern.
So when migrants first come to the border, what are we checking for before we let them enter the United States?
I don't know. Can you tell me?
We're checking for credible fear. It's like one of the basic things that they need before they can get asylum. So while they're doing that, that's when they're being held in Mexico, not for their entire asylum process, correct?
Sure, but more and more people are coming to the border, right?
Yeah, but if we're sending more and more people and more money, isn't that help?
Roll it back.
Hi, Senator. So you bring up the asylum agreements we're going to have with the Northern Triangle countries, but in asylum agreements, it's up to the consent of the asylumee to be able to decide if he wants to go to that country or not. Is that true?
I don't believe so. If it's a Safe Third Country Agreement, we're allowed to deport them to that country.
Move someone to another country without their consent. So how does your point still stand?
Okay, I guess that doesn't stand, but then the other 2 still work then, because if we can't send them there, then we have to put them into a separate detention center where the quality is so bad.
Josephine.
So how can you advocate against expanding these centers to ensure that they're less overcrowded and less have public health hazards, and yet say that that this bill will just lead to more overcrowding. Isn't the status quo exponentially worse than what?
No, I didn't say it would lead to more overcrowding. It's just weird for us to be spending so much money and then also having 2 clauses that send our asylum seekers overseas. And then also it
will improve the conditions relative to what we have now.
I'm sure it will, but it doesn't change the way that the system works, which is.
Stop you there, Senator Josephy. There's one more block available. Would you like to occupy it?
Sure. So you admit that it would actually improve material conditions for migrants. So how can you be against this bill if you yourself have admitted that it would actually improve conditions relative to what we have now?
Those impacts will not be realized for a very long time. And
how do you know?
I mean, it takes time for us to implement the infrastructure.
Is it a month, 2 months, a year? There's no data saying that this would take as long as you describe it to be.
It's not for me to prove that it's going to take a long time. It's for you to show that.
Thank you. Questioning time is elapsed. Speaker and questioner may be muted. We're in line for an affirmation speech. All those in the aft, please raise your placards. All right. I'm going to go to Senator Golovac.
I thank the chair for the reference of the judges in the chamber. Oh, sorry. Is my mic working okay? Okay, great. So it just doesn't look like mine. For the reference of the judges in the chamber, my name is Senator Golovac. I'll be speaking on the affirmation of today's legislation, and it's the first time in today's session, in this session. Oh, and just for the reference, I'll be using my own phone as a timer. Sorry, 1 second. And I assume that the judges are ready. Sorry, there's a mistake in my thing. Okay. Within this chamber, points of a lack of efficiency, points in which there's a political backlog, points in which there's complacency in this chamber can be seen as a minor inconvenience for us. But those legislative downfalls are seen as factors that can cause families to separate at the border. We have to understand the perspective of the asylum seekers at our border, and we must affirm. We first affirm because of the fact that what this legislation would do is it would ensure that we protect children at our border. See, because within the status quo, the Washington Times reports that human traffickers have been using the catch and release policy for their own benefit. What the catch and release policy is it essentially allows people to enter the country and then it expects them to reach a court date. However, we have found that currently what is going on is that human traffickers that have been kidnapping children within south of the border have been entering our country, posing as parents or posing as legal guardians in order to enter the nation. And that enables them in the past to use the catch and release policy for to be able to enter the country and continue to perpetuate their criminal activity. However, with this legislation, we fundamentally stop that. And we stop that by ensuring that the catch and release policy ends. This will protect migrant children at the border, and this will ensure that they no longer are being used as pawns for the human traffickers. And now, second. Now, sorry. Now, Senator Sagar-Likar, he brings up the fact that immigration law, we can't simply throw money at the system in this case. However, it's not simply throwing money at the court system. What we're actually doing is providing funding for legal processes. What I mean by that is that we're not just ensuring that the cases go faster and judges won't just simply be throwing out cases. Instead, we are providing funding to ensure that the cases and there's more attention for every single case that will occur. Now, what do I mean by this? Essentially, currently within the status quo, the entire immigration legal system is completely a lack of efficiency, as I stated. And the way that this is because it's reliant on pro bono work and public defender work. However, with this legislation, by putting at least part of the $150 billion towards that sector of the legal immigration at the border, we ensure that there's more attention being provided to every single family or every single child. Because currently the publicdefender.org reports the fact that public defenders are massively overworked, they are massively underfunded, and they do not have the time to manage the hundreds of cases that they have to deal with. In many of these cases, it is just children. And with these children, they're often new to the country and very young, so they can't accurately describe their situation. Combine that with the fact that there simply is not enough time for each attention to be given to every child or every family. It means that we are seeing massive amounts of public defenders not being able to do the work that they need to do for every single asylum seeker. However, with this bill, by directly providing the funding necessary to expand our public defender protocol, we ensure that every single family will get the care and attention they deserve. Thank you.
Thank you for that speech time of 3 minutes and 9 seconds. Questioners rise, going back to 2 blocks. All right, it's going to go first to Senator Williams.
Thank you. Does funding public defenders solve the issue Senator Sagarlikaro brings up about like judges making rash decisions, being overworked?
Judges are making those rash decisions because in the past we've been trying to expedite the process by just rushing cases. However, by providing more attention to each individual claimant through more public defenders.
How does that make more time for the judges to make right
decisions?
decisions?
We're not rushing the judges. We're enabling for more public defender work.
Okay, thank you. I yield.
All right, next is Senator Lee.
So how exactly do we increase public defender efficiency under this bill?
Because as stated in one of the sections, we provide at least part of the $150 billion.
But is the problem with hiring lawyers or the shortage of lawyers in the market?
It's the shortage of lawyers in the market and also the lack of funds that
So how exactly is the ICE agency supposed to counteract this shortage?
Because the fact that it's more lucrative offer if we have more money to provide.
So we're just going to match private law firm offerings.
Well, there's a massive amount of public defenders, but the thing is that there's also a massive amount of cases.
Questioning time is elapsed. You may be muted. All right, next we're in line for a speech on the negation. Negation, please raise your placards. All right, if they're standing, it's going to go first to Senator Subramanian.
Thank the chair. Hello, everyone. My name is Senator Tara Subramaniam, and this will be my first time speaking this session. I'll assume all my judges are ready without further interruption. Okay. As a first-generation American, immigration is an issue close to my heart. My parents were inspired by Emma Lazarus's words describing Lady Liberty's shining beacon. But senators, our country is a lot different from it was 100 or even 20 years ago. And it pains me to say, we must negate. First, negate because we separate children from their family with little hope of uniting them. According to Section 1A of this bill, U.S. immigration courts shall expedite the processing of asylum claims for all children that are currently being held in processing centers, and cases in which claims don't meet the criteria for asylum will result in children being returned to their country of origin. By processing children before their families, we send kids back to their home country faster than their parents can get there. We risk the lives of these kids, now orphans, who are sent back to the dangerous homes that their parents risk everything to escape. We're funding a process that destroys the lives of every family member involved when we should be destroying the system that created it. Second, we're wasting money on revising the border wall. Section 1E says that we will complete construction of the border wall where gaps in previously built wall exist. However, this is a terrible idea. USA Today in January 2020 tells us a portion of the border wall blew over from a gusty wind on Wednesday, falling on the Mexican side of the border near an active road, and thankfully, nobody was injured. The newly installed panels were part of an ongoing project to improve existing parts of the wall. The wall's slow self-destruction is a large risk to people's lives, but that doesn't mean we should make it stronger. According to the National Geographic in January of 2019, the border wall threatens diverse landscapes, altering natural water flows and patterns of wildfire, exacerbating flooding and posing threats to wildlife and plants, and is exempt from environmental oversight laws. We shouldn't be funding a falling wall. We should make the wall fall safely. Senator Josephine mentions the benefits of expediting the asylum process, but we don't have the judges to do so. According to the Epoch Times, only 3 years ago, there are 300 immigration judges around the country, and they have 550,000 cases pending. We can't hire non-existent judges to be able to expedite this process, so this won't be preventing a public health crisis. And without any judges, the number of public defenders doesn't matter because the judge needs to be there to hear out the public defender. Either way, people can get through the wall, and closing the wall has more benefits than reforming it. Negate.
Thank you for that speech time of 2 minutes and 35 seconds. Questioners, please raise your placard. That's going to go first to Senator Puthumana.
I thank the chair. Senator Subramaniam, would you say in the current status quo, children are separated from their parents at the border?
Yes.
Then how come with the new Biden administration, children being held by US Customs and Border Protection has dropped 88% due to a task force being appointed to make sure children are now reunited with their families?
And now we're expediting the process to make sure that they are separated and funding this process. So it's reversing the effects that the Biden administration has tried to avoid.
Right, but wouldn't we just be continuing this reunite?
No.
That means, sorry, you cut out for a minute. Oh, all right, cool. So if these children's cases are expedited, but the ultimate end result is that they get to stay in the United States rather than being deported, would you affirm?
Then their parents could be deported back to their home country. So they will still be separated.
Pause. Why would like the child stay here versus the parent not?
Well, in either way, the parent and child can be separated. One can be deported back to their home country and one can stay here.
You conceded in cross-examination with Senator Puthumana that they're already being separated right now.
And now we're worsening it.
How?
Puthumana just mentioned how Biden administration is trying to help this and we're worsening this and counter it.
You may be muted. All right, we're looking for a speech in the affirmation now. Right? Those standing, it's going to go first to Senator Kulkarni.
Hi guys, this is Senator Kulkarni. I know it's kind of hard to say, and if you're feeling spicy, you can just call me Mr. K. Any indication from the judges, and I'll be happy to begin. I see the parley, I see 2 judges, I see all 3 judges. At the height of the COVID-19 pandemic in Mexico, consumers were worried and started panic buying one of the biggest commodities all over the world, beer. It seems that while the Mexican people were drinking their problems away, the migrants that were passing through their towns hoping for a future were drowning in problems. The sobering reality is that the immigration system in the United States is systematically broken. But realize that today's legislation provides a solution for that, principally by increasing equity in court cases. Section 3C specifically says that we're going to discontinue the current catch and release program that we have over migrants, which essentially means that migrants will, under that catch and release program, migrants are released back into society after processing their credible fear application, if they agree to come to their court date for asylum hearings. But Kenny Kazaku, a researcher at the Human Rights First organization on January 25th of 2019, explains that 11% of catch and release migrants never show up to their court date. But it's not because the migrants don't want asylum or want to be there illegally, it's because they don't have the information necessary to get there. Kazuko furthers that immigration agencies failed to provide adequate language-appropriate information related to court information or didn't provide the correct dates and times at all. This legislation solves for that problem. By ending the catch and release program completely, it allows direct government oversight of the application process for asylum, directly from the credible fear application all the way to the asylum hearing, because they maintain the custody of the migrant from point A to point B, allowing them full chances to have their voices heard in court, instead of being hunted down and deported for a crime they didn't commit, which is not knowing when their fate was in the first place. Realize that by passing this legislation, we allow every migrant a chance to be an American. But next, look to Senator Sagrolikar, my apologies, when he says, asks why does it benefit when the United States funds the prisons in the United States when we're just going to send people back to Mexico? I already explained to him in questioning that the reason they're held in Mexico is up until their credible fear hearing. But the Immigration Equality Organization found that these credible fear hearings take up to 14 days maximum. For the 2 weeks they're in Mexico, they have to live in poor conditions. But under today's legislation, we give them massively better conditions for the months they may be in the United States. Now, Senator Subramaniam, you're trying to attack the problem in the courtrooms themselves, but realize that today's legislation doesn't need to solve that problem for migrants to be benefited. The problem with courtrooms is that with more backlog, more people are left in detention centers for a long time. But when Section 3A of today's legislation ensures humane conditions in detention centers, that no longer becomes a massive problem of human rights. Instead, it becomes a smaller problem of efficiency. realize that by passing today's legislation, you ensure a human rights benefit.
Thank you for that speech time of 3 minutes and 11 seconds. All those who'd like to question, please raise your placards. Senator Pontes.
So immigration officials aren't telling migrants proper procedures or information, right?
Under the catch and release program, correct.
Right. So if they show no inclination to do that now when they're apprehended, why would they do that if we shove them in a detention center longer?
Right. So the problem isn't with them being in the detention center longer. It's the idea that the detention center now holds the responsibility of getting them to their court date. That's something the government has direct oversight. So when we mandate that happens to a correct court date, it'll more likely happen.
How are these officials going to tell them that if we make them wait in Mexico?
We're moving on to Senator Subramanian.
Hello, Senator. What happens when court cases are forced to go faster when there's not enough resources to do so?
They're obviously heard worse.
Exactly. Judges and defenders are overburdened, which results in inadequate proceedings, right?
This legislation doesn't necessarily try to get these court cases to go faster. Instead, we're trying to make sure that the prisons have a better humane area. So while they may have to wait in prisons longer due to the backlog, at least they're staying in better conditions under this legislation.
Then why does it say that it will expedite proceedings? What do you define that as?
It's the process of getting them into the prison.
Please be muted.
I think the chair.
No problem. We're in line for a speech on the negation. Negation, please raise your placards. Those standing, it's going to go to Senator Pontes.
Thank you. This is Senator Pontes speaking for the first time today. If I could just get any indication from my judges. Awesome, awesome, great, great. Thank you so much. I'm glad Senator Josephy brought up former President John Kennedy's words. Everywhere, immigrants have enriched and strengthened the fabric of American life. For years, we have repaid immigrants back with policy that tears the fabric of the American dream apart. But passing Senator Josephy doesn't fix it. It rips it to pieces. Fail today's legislation first because it expands the definition of refugees. I am surprised that this far in the debate, no one has mentioned this. U.S. Code 208 defines a refugee as someone who faced persecution of race, religion, nationality, membership in a social group, or political opinion. But Section 2 of this legislation completely changes that to anyone fleeing their home country for any reason. Lost their job, stormy weather, simply wanted change. Come on over if you have any reason to want to move, and you can qualify for asylum. The Wall Street Journal on August 3rd of 2020 explains that by letting anyone qualify as a refugee, people under no threat at all can take advantage of refugee status, and actual refugees will have to compete for trial times. Senator Josephy and Kulkarni, you think the overflow of refugees is bad now? Pass this legislation, and now will seem like just a trickle. But second, fail this legislation because they're also sent to dangerous Mexican border towns to wait under Section 3B. Senator Josephy tells you to affirm to reduce the overcrowding in detention centers, but in the process, we end up giving up our humanity. Senator Sagar-Likar explained these centers are overcrowded and use solitary confinement, but the reality is much, much worse. The National Immigration Forum on January of 2019 explains in the past, migrants have had to wait in Mexico between 6 months and several years, where they are frequent victims of crimes like kidnappings, robberies, and even rape. You think immigration officials will be able to give them more information? Senator Kulkarni, we're not even keeping them in the same country. What's worse, the Wall Street Journal on January of 2020 explains, only 4% of these asylum seekers in Mexico even had attorneys, compared to 30% who waited in the US. Senator Josephy, affirming today doesn't shield migrants from the bullets their communities shoot at them. It places migrants directly in the line of fire so they can pull the trigger. I have no problem with funding immigration courts, Senator Golubeck, but not at this cost. If you pass this legislation, you're throwing away the important definition of refugee. Your complacency about abuses shines over your supposed advocacy for migrants. We as Congress need to stop making pitiful plans and start executing proper policy. It is time to restitch the fabric of the American dream.
Thank you for that speech time of 3 minutes and 6 seconds. Questioners, please rise. That's first going towards Senator Polkarny.
Hi, Senator. So let's just clear this up. Let's say there are three big checkpoints in someone's immigration process: the Mexican prisons, US detention centers, and the courtroom. What are we checking for in a migrant between the Mexican prisons and US detention centers?
We're checking if they qualify.
Yeah, through their credible fear, right?
Well, technically, we're making them wait until we can bring them here to check if they qualify.
All right. So we bring them here and we check if they qualify. Doesn't that become expedited if we can hold more people in prisons?
Look, I'm saying that holding them there in the first place is inhumane.
Next, we're going on to Senator Golombek.
Hi, Senator. So the people that you claim that are just fleeing because they lost a job are often those escaping extreme economic circumstances of high inflation and destructive economies. So how can you not sympathize with their point of view whatsoever?
I'm simply saying there are people that are fleeing persecution that qualify as refugees that
Do you
should
not
get
believe that
priority.
people fleeing starvation and economic circumstances deserve that same qualification?
Look, I'd argue if you want to expand the definition of refugees, you can do that
That's
by
what this bill
including
does.
people fleeing economic persecution. You don't
Nobody's
make it a
gonna flee for
free-for-all,
small
anyone
reasons.
can come.
They would
Questioning time has elapsed. You may be muted. All right, we're in line for an affirmation. All those on the aff, raise your placards now. That's going to go to Senator Gu, unopposed.
Thank you, Mr. President. For the first time this session, that's Senator Gu, spelled G-U. I know it's so difficult. If I could just get some sort of like thumbs up from my judges whenever y'all are ready. Thank you so much. Thank you. And Judge Fairbanks, whenever. Thank you so much. Great. Session after session in this Congress, we peddle the myth of America being the so-called land of opportunity. So it's ironic that so often those who come to our land are greeted with the doors of opportunity slammed shut in their faces. The key to those doors comes through a reformation of our asylum system. That key is today's legislation. This entire round, everyone from Senator Sagrolakar on the negation, Senator Kulkarni on the affirmation, and practically everyone in cross-examination has touched on asylum applications. So I want to ask a question that should have been asked in the sponsor. Who exactly is processing these applications? A report from the American Friends Service Committee finds in December of 2019 that the previous administration removed trained asylum officers from the job and placed untrained Border Patrol agents in charge of screening asylum applications and deciding whether asylum seekers got to plead their case in court or plead for their lives back home. But under Section 3A, we changed this issue by allocating $150 billion to ensure that the screening process as a whole is more efficient and humane. Senator Sagrolakar, we use that money to fund asylum processing centers, not just judges. But why is this so important? Well, this guarantees that the people screening the applications are actually trained on how to do their job, which is a huge step up from the untrained officers who are in charge right now. Senators Williams and Sagrolakar, you tell us that officials will make more rash decisions, but joint analysis by The Atlantic in December of 2018 and the American Friends Service Committee in 2020 find that an asylum application is 400% more likely to be approved when it's in the hands of a trained official versus an untrained Border Patrol agent. Senator Subramaniam, that means that the children you champion actually get to stay in the United States. They aren't deported. Finally, Senator Pontes, it means that our asylum officers will know how to weed out fraudulent applications. Why does this mean you vote affirmation? Well, Senator Sagrolakar, contrary to what you tell us, it means that asylum seekers won't be deported at such high rates because for so many, deportation is equatable to a death sentence. Senator Pontes, you champion the advocacy that we shouldn't detain asylum seekers in terrible Mexican detention facilities. Those conditions may be bad, but they're even worse outside of the centers. The Wall Street Journal reported in September of 2018 that 400 people are murdered every day in Latin America. In fact, by merely existing, you have a 1 in 10 chance of being killed. Too many parents are being forced to bury their children, and countless kids as young as 8 years old are becoming orphans because their parents are killed by gangs. Senators Sagrolakar and Pontes, conditions on the outside of the centers are even worse than those on the inside. The affirmation is the only side that offers light at the end of the tunnel. Right now, our asylum system sets out to determine whether a person deserves deportation, not whether they deserve protection. Last time I checked, it should be the other way around.
Thank you for that speech. Time of 3 minutes and 1 second. Questioners, please raise your placard. All right, of those standing, it's going to go to Senator A.
Hi there.
Thank you. So, Representative, you claim that we need trained judges in order to help these children, correct?
Let's make a distinction. Not trained judges, trained asylum processing officers.
All right.
That's like the first step.
All right. So when we define this, how does today's piece of legislation actually provide training for these people? Because providing funding does not equal providing
Senator,
training.
if you ask me, promoting efficient and humane processing, the first thing on the line is making sure that the officers know how to do their job. Like what could be more inhumane than an officer not knowing how to process an application?
We're moving on to Senator Sagrilakar.
Thank you. So do ACAs put the asylum seekers in detention centers or out on the streets?
They hold them in like Mexican and Latin American detention centers while they await their like trials.
Yeah, they still have to seek asylum in the other countries, right?
No,
like
they
that's
seek
what
asylum.
That's what a
No, they seek asylum in the United States, and while their claims are being processed, they're held overseas.
No, isn't it that they want to seek asylum here? So if we don't have space, we allow them to seek asylum in a quote unquote safe country, right?
Sure, but regardless, their claims are more likely to be processed for those who are seeking it here.
Right, we're in line for negation. Negation speakers, raise your pockets, please. So stand is going to go to Senator Lee.
Thank you, Chair. This is Senator Lee, spelled L-E-E, speaking for the first time in this legislative session. Could the judges please give me an indication of when they're ready, and I'll be happy to begin. Perfect, 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 perfect. On May 1st, China released a human rights report on US human rights violations. When even China has the audacity to tell us that we are human rights abusers, we know we have a problem. Today's legislation only affirms China's report. Now let's first dive into the argument regarding the sending of these asylum seekers to Mexico. Apart from the conditions of these camps being extremely atrocious, I am appalled that no senator has mentioned that there really is no obligation for Mexico to even take these people that we are detaining. If they make it to our borders, why then does it suddenly become Mexico's obligation to take in these asylum seekers? Now, even if they take in our refugees, the problem with these camps sound way too familiar. Now, speakers on my side have emphasized that we should be spending money to fix the way the system works. But under today's legislation, Senator Jofi, we are actually worsening condition not only by exporting our problems to Mexico, but we are also destroying our own immigration policies. One of the remedies to problems with ICE was the policy of catch and release, which is actually beneficial, Senator Golubic and Kulkarni, because we decrease the sheer massive amount of people that are in our detention centers, thus mitigating the impacts of overcrowding and COVID-19. These people we are releasing are merely released because they are awaiting trial. Our government can do a better job informing people of their court cases, even without spending this $150 billion. But today's legislation gets rid of that, which means that literally all the detainees that the US captures will now be sent to these atrocious camps, where more human rights violations will be committed, solving nothing but merely pushing the existing problems of ICE overseas. Now, second, regardless of the benefits of asylum cooperative agreements, let me explain why we are restricted by our own law to reinstate the agreements. These nations that we wish to send these asylum seekers to fail to even qualify as safe places under our own US code, under Title 12, Chapter 12. By passing, we are failing our own obligations to protect these human lives. Now, Senator Gu admits that detention facilities outside of Mexico's are bad, right? Yet under today's legislation and the ACA agreements, we are literally sending these asylum seekers to seek asylum in these dangerous places. Many of those who are from this very same region that the United States plans to send them back to. According to the Migration Policy Institute, for the past 4 years, these same 3 countries where we are sending them to are the places where we have granted the most asylum. Now, you're probably wondering, why can't we just amend our own laws? While we could amend these own laws, the reality is by passing, all we are doing is exporting our problem overseas and doing nothing to protect these human lives. Senators, these people are already the most vulnerable in society. Yet, Senator Gu, we shut the door and kicked them down the stairs. As supposed global protectors of human rights, we have failed at our own doorstep. Let us show the world that we will continue to protect the human rights of these asylum seekers, traveling thousands of miles in search of the American dream. Thank you.
Thank you for that speech time of 3 minutes and 5 seconds. Questioners, raise your placard, please. Those standing, it's going to go first to Senator Gu.
What's happening to asylum seekers right now?
Atrocious conditions.
90% of, they stay in atrocious conditions, then 90% of them are sent back to even
but
more
as
atrocious
so many
conditions.
People on my side have already showed you, by sending them to Mexico, we're sending them to worse detention facilities.
I know, but
That
when
is
we
not
deport,
beneficial.
Senator, when we're deporting them in the status quo, we're returning them permanently to even worse conditions. Don't we at least offer some semblance of hope to be able to stay in the United States?
does the exact same thing.
We don't do that to every asylum.
Next to Senator Williams.
Well, in the status quo, that's the same.
I want to continue, Senator Gu. Is it not net better to still provide some amount of funding to make our facilities and programs better?
Yes, while that is true, the problem is today's legislation literally sends those peoples to Mexico. Why are we improving our
Hold
own
on, does it
facilities
send
when we're
those
literally
people to
just
Mexico, or does it just hold them until we can get them in?
We're sending them to Mexico because literally they're coming to our borders, but now we're telling them, no, you have to stay in Mexico. And there's no obligation for Mexico to even take these people in the first place.
Thank you. Time has elapsed. You may be muted. All right, we're looking for an affirmation speech now. Please raise your placards.
Motion.
Senator Humana. Oh, that's a motion? State that motion.
Motion to previous question.
Any seconds? Any opposed? All right, assuming unanimous consent, that's so ordered. We're now going to move on to voting procedure. This is how I run it. I'm going to call your side, raise your placard up. I'm going to call your name, and you can put it down. All right, so all those in the affirmation, please raise your placards. First, I see Senator Golombek, Senator Kulkarni, Senator Gu, Senator Williams, and Senator Josephine. All right, that's 5. All those in the negation, please raise your placards. First, I see Senator Pontes, Senator Lee, Senator A, Senator Putumana, Senator Sagrolakar, and Senator Subramanian. That's 6. So on a ballot of 5 to 6, today's legislation does indeed fail, unfortunately. All right,
Motion?
I'm not recognizing any motion. Senator Pontes.
Seeing a natural break in debate, I move for a 5-minute recess.
Seconds?
Second.
Objections? Seeing none, assuming unanimous consent, that's so ordered. All right, we're going to be back here at 3:22. Right, we have about 45 seconds left, so if you guys can start shuffling your way back in.
Do we want to take a quick split again before we go back into the bill?
I'll just facilitate it real quick.
That would be great.
Yeah, please just turn on your cameras real quick. We can do it in 20 seconds. All right, all those on the app, just throw up your hand real quick on voter ID. Those with their cameras on, that seems like 5. Now, 6 potentially. All right, all those in the negation, hands up. Seems split enough. Very nice. All right, we have 5 seconds left, so I'm just gonna call the session back into order at 4:22 right now, or 3:22. And with that, I'm gonna wait for the judges. Judge Owens, if you're there with us, you mind just turning on your camera, letting us know you're here? All right, we're just gonna wait. Oh, there you go. All right, I think we're ready to move on to the bill concerning voter ID. At this time, I'm gonna recognize any authorships. Any authorships on the voter ID bill? All right, seeing none, any sponsorships? That's gonna go to Senator Kuthumana, unopposed.
I thank the chair. Seeing that the chamber looks pretty much in order, may I begin at your leisure? All right, and with that, I will begin. In his wallet, Anthony Settles carries an expired Texas identification card, his social security card, and an old student ID from the University of Houston. What he does not have is the one thing that he needs to vote in the presidential election, a current Texas photo ID. And for Settles to get one of those, his name has to match his birth certificate, which cannot happen because of his mother remarrying when he was just 14. To obtain a new document changing his name to the one he has used for 51 years, Settles has to go to court, a process that would cost him over $250, more than he's willing to pay. Because of the current status quo, in which voter ID laws are especially in place to suppress the vote and are meant to counter the boogeyman of voter fraud, I must urge a passage of this bill. But before I go into my 2 reasons of why we should do so, let's take a brief outlook on what this bill presents. Section 1 identifies that we are banning photo ID from being used across the board. Section 2 puts the definitions for what photo identification exactly is. Section 3 gives the Department of Justice licensing of overseeing this bill. Section 4 gives the date of 2022 of implementation, specifically citing that it is before midterms. And finally, Section 5, of course, declares that all bills in conflict are null and void. First, voter fraud is largely non-existent within today's elections, and it doesn't affect it at all, rendering the concept of photo ID useless. Even when it may have occurred, it is an ignorable fraction, with AP News on May 21st, 2021, stating how Wisconsin election officials identified just 27 cases of potential voter fraud out of 3.3 million ballots cast in the November presidential election. What's even more ironic is that more ballots are thrown out because of photo ID laws than legitimate fraud. A federal court in Texas found that over 608,000 registered voters don't have the forms of identification that the state now requires for voting. For example, residents can vote with their concealed carry handgun license, but not their state-issued student ID. This has to stop immediately. And the justification for photo ID laws being that they stop fraud is wrong. They only stop voters from attending elections. So please vote up this bill to stop that from happening. Secondly, photo ID is meant and oft intended to prevent minorities specifically from voting. As Brennan Center on January 16, 2020 points out, study after study has shown that voter impersonation fraud is vanishingly rare, as I have mentioned. Many also claim that these laws impose little burden because everyone has the requisite ID. But the reality is that millions of Americans don't, and they are disproportionately people of color. When North Dakota enacted its current ID law, 19% of Native Americans lack qualifying ID. Tennessee imposed voter ID law after a, quote, large-scale effort to register Black voters ahead of the 2018 election. And Georgia enacted an exact match law that is hurting people like Anthony Settles. We have to enact this law, bearing in mind that every single time there have been voter ID laws, they are meant to harm minorities. And we should help people like Anthony Settles.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 11 seconds. All those who'd like to ask a question, please raise your placard. 4 blocks. Right? Senator Williams, unopposed.
Senator, how much fraud exists currently?
I cited the state of Wisconsin, which is 27 over 3.3 million. If you divide that, you get about 0.0487.
Right. Does this mean that fraud can't happen, or that fraud can't happen?
I'm simply citing that there's little fraud in today's elections because, as we've seen with legislators, they justify the use of photo ID to prevent fraud, which doesn't even
Does
have.
that mean preventative measures are just bad?
They're preventing something that doesn't happen at all.
Move on to Senator Pontes.
When photo ID laws exist, do polling places offer exceptions?
Rarely, as we see in states.
All of them do. Why is it prohibitive if people who don't have one have other options?
It's prohibited because look at Texas, for example. It's a state-issued student ID. It's not even like the university is the one giving it. The
Okay, but they have
as a form of ID, yet the state rejects it in favor of, say, a handgun license. This is
okay, but they have exceptions. So why does it matter if they don't have one?
I'm still confused by that line of question. Photo IDs are meant to suppress the vote.
I have to pause you right there. Senator Lee, you have the next question.
So falling off that line of questioning, voter ID is just one method of confirmation, right? Why exactly is it so necessary to get rid of it?
So necessary to get rid of it because we see in these states that specifically have enacted photo ID laws. In North Dakota, for example, with a population
But in these
Native
states,
American,
aren't there exceptions, as Senator Pontes pointed out?
Perhaps, but still.
So why can't these constituents rely on these exceptions?
I'm gonna have to stop you there. Senator Lee, no one else is standing up. You can continue your line of questioning if you so wish.
Could you answer the question?
Okay, so you believe I stated why can't we use these exceptions? I'm still
confused. Why can't we use these exceptions?
I'm still confused as to what these exact exceptions are.
So if exceptions exist in the status quo,
what are these exceptions?
So there are other exceptions that is questioning block over?
No, you can continue.
Oh, so if there are exceptions, right? Can these alternatives be beneficial? That's all I'm asking. Yes or no?
I'm not sure what you mean by these exceptions as you're not naming them and what they are. But like in
has elapsed, speaker and questioners may be muted. All right, we're now in line free speech on the negation. Negation, please raise your placards. Senator Williams.
All right, thank you. That's Senator Williams. I will begin unless somebody tells me not to. Perfect, let's begin. Let me be the first to say that I understand the arguments coming from the proposition. I can understand that some ID laws may be restrictive. However, their claims are vastly overstated. I reside in the great state of Kansas where we do require photo IDs to vote, and I have served as a poll worker for several elections, and I can personally vouch that voter IDs truly help stop fraud, especially unintentional fraud. And that is the big part here. This is something that sure is to go quiet in this debate, but unintentional fraud is the #1 form of voter fraud. This primarily includes voters who are voting from something as simple as the wrong address. Most of the time, they don't even know it. Voter ID laws allow us poll workers to identify these issues and ensure voters vote in the right location for the right offices. I see it all the time. Voters who move and their ID doesn't match their new location. This allows us to let them vote provisionally so we can make sure that they vote in the correct location and that everyone can cast a ballot. Secondly, I believe that voter ID or photo ID laws are just common sense safety. Americans have the right to know that their elections are run fairly and smoothly. A voter ID is just a common sense approach. You typically need an ID to fly, drive, open a bank account, or get a job. If all of these places require an ID, why should the polling place be any different? The Supreme Court ruled ID laws constitutional because fraud can happen. I mean, we actually use a form of voter ID when voting for our presiding officer in the form of preventing multiple votes from the same IP address. The opposition need not prove any instances of fraud actually prevented by IDs, but that the fact is that it can happen. If the Supreme Court says that it is possible, I'm inclined to believe them. Every eligible voter deserves the right to cast a ballot, but they also deserve the right to not have their vote diluted by an ineligible voter. The sanctity of our elections is a top priority, and photo ID is an easy and safe way to do so. Thirdly, this bill is effectively undermined. Going back to the previous questioning segment, this bill only bans photo ID at the polls. Most states don't even require a photo on the ID to vote. Regardless, states can just effectively subvert this legislation by asking for a social security card or a birth certificate. These are just as hard to obtain as standard IDs, so if the proposition truly wanted to prevent these restrictive laws, they would ban all forms of ID. And to talk about the exceptions that previous senators talked about, in the state of Kansas, we allow religious exemptions that you just have to sign one document and you don't have to show your photo ID. There's also several different types of IDs that you can show, not necessarily a driver's license. And lastly, ID laws don't actually reduce minority turnout. Senator Pathumana wants you to believe that these laws reduce minority turnout, but the opposite is true. The National Bureau of Economic Research released a study in 2019 that states that ID laws have no measurable impact on voting behavior. I stand in opposition to this bill because every American deserves the right to a safe and equitable election. Photo IDs are a simple way to prove who you are. We must preserve election integrity by opposing this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you for that speech time of 2 minutes and 57 seconds. Questioners, please rise. 4 blocks. Or those standing, it's going to go first to Senator Josephine.
So you pose this concept that this bill is common sense because photo IDs are so universal and required, but what about the process to actually obtain one? Is it really easy to obtain a photo ID for millions of, poor or uneducated people?
Right. I do understand that it is hard, especially for, rural people like where I live. I understand that it can be hard, but the fact of the matter is if you start that process a month or 2 in advance, you have plenty of time to get that ID.
Be able to do that. People have jobs, obligations. Why should we have?
I understand that it can be difficult.
Next to Senator Puthamana.
I thank the chair. Senator Williams, while yes, Kansas may do a commendable job with their photo ID, being from Kansas myself, would you agree that there are some states that abuse their photo ID laws?
I wouldn't necessarily say that. I can't give you an example of a state that abuses its voter ID laws.
And about your second statistic in your second point saying that voter ID laws don't harm voter turnout, did it give any examples of states which that applied?
Can you restate that, please?
In your evidence card in your second point, did it give an example of a state?
No, it just said across the nation.
Next to Senator Kulkarni.
Hi, Senator. So these photo ID laws, they prevent these IDs, which are essentially just like a median of information, right?
Correct.
So these types of information, why can't they be procured directly from the person at the polling place to verify identity?
What do you mean by that?
Isn't like to compare against state records and voter registration, why can't they just simply ask a person?
Because we need a state issued document to know that that is what it is.
But that's under this legislation, not under like necessity.
Next
I don't believe that that's true.
Next to Senator Golombek.
Hi, Senator. So within your speech, you reasoned that if we were to actually ban all forms of ID, we would also ban the ones that are expensive and hard to get. But doesn't this legislation do exactly that?
No, it only bans photo ID, which is not.
If we read the legislation itself, does it not include multiple different forms of licenses, passports, employee issued ID, all forms of different things like that?
Yeah, those all have photos. Those are all examples of photo ID.
Exactly. And aren't those the forms of IDs that are extremely expensive and difficult to get for people like in
I do not
rural
believe
areas?
that they are that expensive to get.
Questioning time has elapsed. Speaker and questioners may be muted.
Thank you.
All right, we're now in line for affirmation. All those on the affirmation, raise your placards, please. Senator A.
Thank you. This is Representative Avramova speaking for the first time this legislative session, AVRAMOVA, for my judges. And as always, at the leisure of everyone above me, please give me an indication when you're ready, and I'll be happy to begin. Good. Awesome. It's a sad time in America when the red, white, and blue is hijacked by red versus blue. Too often, it seems like our policies work in the interest of the few, but to detriment of many. Voter ID laws in themselves are an unhealthy supplement to ensuring a strong democracy. If you truly care about speaking up for those who can't for themselves, say it with your vote. First, you'll pass today's piece of legislation because it will decrease voter discrimination by reducing the cost to obtain a ballot. As the Brennan Center told us back in 2006, millions of lack IDs. 11% of US citizens, or more than 21 million Americans, do not have any photo IDs. This number has only grown since 2006, with Senator Lee asked in questioning why people are unable to obtain these documents. Well, to answer his question, a report from Harvard Law tells us back in 2014 that obtaining IDs do cost money. Even if an ID is offered for free, voters must incur numerous costs, such as paying for birth certificates to apply for a government-issued ID. Thus, they become a significant expense for lower-income Americans who struggle to get by on a daily basis. Moreover, Senator Williams, the travel required is often a major burden on people with disabilities, the elderly, or those in rural areas without access to a car or public transportation. In my very own home state of Texas, people in rural areas must travel approximately 170 miles to reach the nearest ID office. Further, Senator Williams wants security, yet what this does is discriminate against the vote of our low-income constituents and contradict democracy itself. But when we pass today's piece of legislation and bend the requirement of these IDs, we allow an equal chance for everyone to speak up, no matter of their socioeconomic status. But the second reason you pass today's piece of legislation is because it increases voter turnout by allowing more Americans to vote. As Senator Williams told you that IDs don't make a difference to the amounts of ballots cast, they are completely wrong, because the Washington Post tells us on October 9, 2012, voter ID laws reduce voter turnout. A 2014 Government Accountability Office study found that strict photo ID laws reduce turnout by 2 to 3 percentage points, which can translate to tens of thousands of votes lost in a single state. This has affected numerous states, such as his state of Kansas and Tennessee, as the study found. However, implementing both Section 1 and 2 will be effective because we will reduce the barrier which stopped people from voting previously. But what's even worse about voter IDs is that they target minorities, because the Washington Post told us in February 2017, Hispanics are affected by these laws the most. Turnout is 7.1 percentage points lower in general election and 5.3 percentage lower in primates. Strict ID laws mean lower African American, Asian American, and multiracial American turnout as well, and affecting white counterparts. Senators, we cannot be targeting our own citizens and the people who seek our protection the most. Pass today's piece of legislation to ensure that everyone's voice is heard and validated, that every ballot is counted, and the voice of American democracy rules.
Thank you. That was a speech of 3 minutes and 11 seconds. All questioners, please raise your placards. Once again, all questioners, please raise your placards. We only have 2 blocks here. All right, that's going to go to Senator Gu unopposed.
How can you claim that voter ID laws reduce turnout when Senator Williams has already disproved that?
But I already disproved his proof. I don't, just because I spoke after him, I proved to you that it does.
Okay, so Senator, let me ask you this, right? If you need like a government issued ID to like pretty much do everything in adult life, what makes it so difficult to obtain one to vote?
Once again, I told you, these people cannot pay to obtain it. What you don't understand is some people cannot get by. Paying for a birth certificate even poses so much for them.
That's fine. I rescind my time.
We're moving on to Senator Williams.
Thank you. So we'll follow up Senator Gu on the turnout. What range of years was your study from?
So it ranges from 2012 to 2017.
All right, fair enough. Those are about the same years mine is. So we'll see where that goes. Thank you.
All right, I'll just absorb the remaining 13 seconds. Questioner and speaker may be muted. All right, we're now in line for negation speech. Negation, please raise your placards. All right, of those standing, it's going to go to Senator Subramanian.
I thank the chair. Hello, everyone. My name is Senator Tara Subramaniam, and this will be my second time speaking this session. Judges, I'll assume you all are ready without further interruption. Sounds good. When an acorn hit Chicken Little on his head, he said, "The sky is falling, the sky is falling." When proponents on the affirmation heard that voter ID laws were suppressing the rights of minorities, they decried unfair treatment. But just like it turned out that Chicken Little was a hoax, so is the premise of this bill. Stand with me in negation, and here's why. First, voter ID laws don't have an effect on turnout of minority voters or of anyone. Senators on the affirmation continue to mention the oppression of minority voters, but the National Bureau of Economics research Senator Williams mentioned not only showed that voter IDs don't improve turnout, but offered an explanation for the flaws in affirmation senators' studies on decreasing turnout. Senator Buthuma mentions increased turnout of minorities after voter ID laws are removed, explained by the Bureau. that the likelihood that non-white voters were contacted by a campaign increases, suggesting that parties' mobilization might have offset modest effects of the laws on the participation of ethnic minorities. To summarize, these effects are because of correlation, not causation. Senator Avramova continues to mention the lack of representation in minorities, but this point is simply cherry-picking data because we have data of a 1.6 billion data set over the course of 10 years that the National Bureau of Economics Research offers compared to Senator Avramova's evidence of 5 years. The reason that there was increased turnout in this study was because of an outreach campaign afterward, not overturning the law itself, and this effect is not long-term. Second, this bill opens the door for corruption by increasing our power. The federal government is a government of limited powers, so there has to be an express or implied grant of authority within the Constitution to pass this bill. The power to pass is not granted in Article 1, Section 2, 8, or 4, which gives Congress power to override state rules on the times, places, and manners of holding elections for representatives. Voter IDs don't affect the time nor place of holding elections. They don't affect the manner of holding elections since people can vote in the same manner regardless. Since the precedent for the definition of manner refers to how the ballot is cast, such as mail-in voting or ballot boxes, it does not refer to what requirements it takes to be cast. So by passing this bill, we expand that definition of manner of elections, making so that Congress has much more power to govern states' elections. By giving this power to Congress to oversee our own elections, we increase our power and put our constituents at risk for more corruption. And the impact of setting a precedent to ignore our constituents' rights and the fundamental law of our nation outweighs any impacts that affirmation may make. Negate.
Thank you for that speech time of 2 minutes and 42 seconds. Questioners, please rise, raise your placards. All right, of those standing, it's going to go first to Senator A.
Thank you. So, Representative, if 21 million Americans do not have any type of ID, how does that not affect the election's outcome?
Well, the study showed that it does not affect the election's outcome. Maybe because they just simply didn't want to vote.
1 million people's vote does make a difference.
Just because they don't have an ID doesn't mean that they don't have an ID and they wanted to vote.
They cannot vote, not because they do not want to, but because they don't have the opportunity.
They could get an ID, but they don't want to.
Money. They don't have the money to obtain an ID.
The study showed that there was no effect.
Next to Senator Josephine.
So you talk a lot about turnout, but I want to shift the focus to enforcement, right? Is the enforcement of this bill, things like questioning people about their IDs, asking them, is this legitimate, finding holes in their IDs and finding issues in them, is that enforcement equal across all races, or are people of color more likely to be questioned about their ID in the first place?
I mean, sure, you could argue that, but it really doesn't matter because you have to focus on the stats, not what might happen.
Focus on people of color being more likely to be questioned.
You focus on stats. You focus on stat and evidence, not assumptions.
You may be muted. All right, we're looking for an affirmation speech now. Please raise your placard. All right, that's going to go to Senator Josephine.
I thank the chair for the judges that Senator Josephy, spelled Josephy. You can see on my little Zoom name tag thing too. Just give me a thumbs up whenever you're ready and I'll begin. Great. All right, Judge Fairbanks, is that a thumbs up? Okay, wonderful. Let's pin the PO and I'll get started. Voter ID policy has long been at the forefront of the voting rights debate for years now. This discriminatory practice has long outstayed its welcome in all of our elections. To protect your constituents and to protect our democracy, we must all stand in firm affirmation and dismantle these oppressive laws. Affirm. But first, let's touch on one of the main arguments made by the negation, that when Senator Williams came up here and told us one simple claim, that this bill is, quote, common sense. But when we examine the facts, we find a starkly different picture. Now, Senator A told us about the cost of getting an ID. And Senator Williams said that getting an ID is plain and simple. But Senator A missed the broader issue with getting an ID that I want to touch upon. Because as the Washington Post tells us in May of 2016, the issue with getting an ID isn't just about money or distance. It's the much broader and massive bureaucracy, rigorous tests, and complex system that people have to navigate in order to obtain even a simple driver's license or photo ID. In essence, it's impossible for many poor, minority, or uneducated voters to even obtain an ID, not just because of how much it costs or the inordinate distance that they have to drive to get one, but because of the sheer bureaucratic hurdles that they have to pass to obtain one in the first place. Hurdles that not even an educated person can do often alone. So why should we expect the poorest of our constituents to be able to do that too? Senators, it's clear that this bill isn't just an issue of race, but one of a bureaucratic machine with no end in sight. A machine that discriminates against the poor, the uneducated, and those who just don't know how to navigate it. So, Senator Williams, this bill is anything but common sense, because instead of photo ID being a universal entity that anyone and everyone can get, it's more of a luxury than a right for millions of poor and uneducated people. Because after all, as Senator A explained, more than 21 million of our constituents lack it in the first place. So with all due respect to the negation, this bill isn't common sense, it's common discrimination. But second, let's touch upon a second point that the negation brought up in questioning that we have to dispel immediately. Now, the negation told us in questioning that this isn't an issue of enforcement, but one of turnout, that when we focus on the numbers and the statistics, we find that this bill is enforced equally and that all people are questioned on their IDs the same. But in reality, let's look at the very numbers that the negation told us to look at in the first place and see how this bill is enforced fundamentally unequally. Because as the Quarterly Journal of Political Science finds in 2012, even when adjusting for a number of external factors, the overarching consensus is that Black and Hispanic voters are asked, questioned, and interrogated about their identification at a significantly higher rate than white Americans. In essence, when we talk about the discrimination on these laws, we have to look past just the distribution of IDs and understand that the fundamental enforcement of voter ID laws, how much people are actually questioned about their IDs, is fundamentally prejudiced. And that fundamentally is why we affirm today. Because under this bill, because under the status quo, even if we accept the negation's point that the law itself isn't racist, the targeted enforcement of these laws most definitely are. Senators, the issue here is clear. The negation's point failed to hold any water, and voter ID laws are not just enforced discriminately, but are built upon a foundation of racism.
Speaking time has elapsed. Thank you for that speech time of 3 minutes and 12 seconds. All questioners, please raise their placards. All right, if those standing, it's going to go to Senator Subramanian.
I thank the chair. Do you think that we as a Congress should focus on the most reliable evidence when debating legislation?
We should, and that's why we should affirm.
So when the negation has shown that regardless of enforcement, it doesn't affect turnout, why is the affirmation ignoring the evidence the negation has made and proven to be the most reliable?
Because the negation is wrong, because they misrepresent the evidence and they don't actually prove that this bill isn't discriminatory. Because
so tell me why your evidence is better, Senator.
My evidence is profound, it's empirical, and it's wide-ranging and it's consensus-based. Because the negation
does it show a causal effect?
It does, and I've proved that multiple times.
People can't get a photo ID, right?
They can't. I mean, millions of people.
Right. So if exceptions to voter IDs exist in every polling place that have photo ID laws, why is this such a burden?
Because we don't have 21 million exceptions.
They exist in every polling place.
We have 21 million Americans who don't have IDs, who are live in these states, and who can't vote because of that.
But they have exceptions that they can pursue.
And how can we have such resounding evidence of discrimination and enforcement in legislation of these bills, of these IDs?
Questioning time has elapsed. Speaker and questioners may be muted. All right, we're in line for negation speech. Negation, raise your placards. With those standing, it's going to go to Senator Pontes.
Thank you. This is Senator Pontes, spelled the same. If I could get an indication of readiness from my judges, I'd be happy to begin. Great, great. Awesome. And I'm seeing a nod from Judge Fairbanks. I'll take that as a yes. Great, thank you. What we see is only a fractional part of what really is. A famous quote, often accompanied with a photo of an iceberg. What we see is the tip of the iceberg. But if you dive a little deeper into voter ID laws, you'll understand that they're more important than the affirmation lets on. First, principally, pass this legislation because they increase access to photo IDs. Senator Puthumana and A establishes that many Americans don't have photo IDs, but that's why you fail. The Indiana International and Comparative Law Review in 2019 explains, photo ID laws have been challenged in court whenever they're implemented, and for the 13 states whose laws have actually been upheld, They've all been coupled with a dedication to make photo IDs more accessible. That includes providing free IDs, free birth certificates to get IDs, and even free transport to issuing centers that Senator Williams was so concerned about. And all of Senator Puthumana's statistics about Americans who do not have IDs are from before states implemented their policies. Senator Puthumana thinks photo IDs are only for voting, but it isn't. In fact, having a photo ID isn't just crucial for voting. That is why the expansion of access is so critical. Senator Williams told you that photo IDs are also necessary to claim Social Security benefits, go to the doctor, access libraries with public resources, and even make a bank account. We end up increasing access to photo IDs for the minorities that you advocate for, Senator A, through keeping these laws. But second, fail today's legislation because turnout is because of miscommunication. The negation proves to you that photo ID laws don't decrease turnout. But let's understand why the affirmation brings up a decrease in turnout and why that's not caused by the laws themselves. Senator Williams told you that polling places have some exceptions. Allow me to expand. The PBS News cites that on October 29th of 2020, every polling place is required to provide an exception. Things like signing an affidavit, a poll book, or simply providing personal information. Senator Josephy, if people face those barriers, they can use these exceptions. So if they have other options, why are we seeing this lowered turnout? Miscommunication. The Washington Post on September 4th of 2020 explains the reason that there is decreased turnout in some places, Senator A, is not because of the laws themselves, because people are not getting the message that there are other ways to vote. The solution lies in increasing communication about those alternatives, not banning them entirely. Photo ID laws are only the tip of the iceberg. The rest of the benefits are unlocked when you keep those laws.
Thank you for that speech time of 2 minutes and 57 seconds. Questioners, please raise your placards. Right, it's going to go first to Senator Sagrolakar.
For those who already have IDs, when you present your ID at the polling station, doesn't there have to be a check through the system to make sure everything's all right?
Sure.
Right, doesn't that make it easier? So if every record has to match with the voter ID, doesn't it make it easier to attack? Because you can just change it a very small amount.
What I'm saying is if your photo ID isn't accepted, there are exceptions you can go to so you can still vote. I don't understand why the affirmation is painting this as such a problem when they can pursue exceptions. I told you even just providing personal information can qualify as an exception.
Next to Senator Puthumana.
I thank the chair. So what if someone, say, changes their name or had a name change so it doesn't match the birth certificate? Would there be an exception of personal information for that?
Sure. I mean, I'd argue that they have multiple exceptions, so people who don't have the photo ID
then
can
how come in the
pursue
state of
other
Texas,
options.
when you give your personal exception of saying that you did have a name change, that you have to go to a court and change your birth certificate for that personal exemption?
Look, you can get a provisional license to vote and then go and change it later. The fact is, people are being turned away simply because they don't have a photo ID.
You may be muted. All right, we're now looking for a speech in the affirmation. Affirmation, please raise your placards. Those standing, it's going to go to Senator Sagrolakar.
I thank the chair for the judges, Senator Sagrolakar, spelled the same. Just a thumbs up when you're ready would be great. For people supposed to represent the whole nation, the NEG is pretty scared today. Scared of the boogeyman of voter fraud and the clear net benefit of this statute. Now, as we move to the end of this debate, let's take apart those two issues and see why the affirmative comes out on top. But first, other AF speakers have already given evidence that voter fraud doesn't exist on a near significant level. But let me provide a very simple logical justification for why those shenanigans don't work. It's a felony for even trying to commit in-person voter fraud, meaning you're going to get sent to prison. In person, this type of fraud nets you 1 vote, which means it's not a strong payoff. There's no logical justification for it happening. And Senator Puthumani provided at the very beginning of this debate strong evidence that it doesn't happen in the status quo. But next, Senator Williams brought up the instance of unintentional voter fraud, which is a valid concern. But they miss the key idea that this type of fraud can only happen if there is voter ID information to check against a system, i.e. if there's a database. If you eliminate that need, unintentional fraud is no longer a factor. But more importantly, I want to address something that my side has missed through the entire debate, and it's Senator Pontes's claim about exceptions and the fact that exceptions at polling places can provide a solution for the app. I argue that even if there are exceptions, there's a huge problem. When you require IDs, there's always going to be this check that goes through the system. The fact that there are people who couldn't vote last year proves that exceptions are not a panacea to the 21 million people who are disenfranchised. Meaning that in order to be validated, even if you have a voter ID, the voter ID needs to match exactly the info in the system. Now, it's easy enough to conclude that when you require IDs, you're going to make it easier for hackers to attack poll sites on a large scale. Because if hackers manipulate your information a very small amount, they can ensure that the records don't match the voter IDs of a lot of people. In fact, Peter Well of Wired explains in September of 2017, for as little as a few $1,000s, online attackers can purchase enough personal information to alter voter registration information in as many as 36 states. In fact, Rick Pearson of the Illinois and National Politics Institute at the Chicago Tribune explains in August of 2016 that in Illinois, hackers accessed a database for the Illinois Board of Elections, compromising up to 200,000 personal voter records because of mismanagement of voter IDs. The right of Americans to choose their own political destiny is in danger of being overtaken by hackers bent on shifting the balance of power in their favor. The only thing left that we can conclude at the end of this debate about voter IDs is that though driver's licenses contain red and US passports are blue, upon close examination, the claims of the neg fall through.
Thank you for that speech time of 3 minutes, 1 second. Questioners, raise your placard. Senator Subramaniam.
Should we be able to govern our own elections?
Yes.
So we should have the power to make our constituents vote in our favor or exclude a certain group from voting.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
So why are we considering passing legislation that expands our power to do so, as the negation has revealed?
How does this expand power? We're decreasing the requirements to vote.
We're expanding the power by expanding the definition of manner, which was a state right. But now we are passing legislation that changes that, right?
We're expanding the definition of manner. Doesn't that
as shown in my
federalize it,
speech, yes.
standardize it?
Moving on to Senator Pontes.
So I told you that the reason people were turned away was because people weren't informed about exceptions. Why can't we push states to increase communication?
We definitely can do that, but it's not going to be enough, as it's clearly visible that people are not able to vote.
That's because we have no regulation saying you have to tell people about the exceptions.
Okay, that doesn't happen in your world either, unless we pass a different piece of legislation.
But if it's possible to keep photo ID laws that increase access to photo IDs
there's still
to everyone.
There's still the issue of hacking, where it's much easier to...
Questioning time has elapsed. Speaker and questioner may be muted. We're now in line for a speech on the negation. Please raise your placards if you're on the negation. That's going to go to Senator Gu, unopposed.
Thank you, Mr. President. For the second time today, that's Senator Gu, spelled G-U, didn't change. Once again, if my judges are ready, I'd really appreciate a thumbs up. Thank you, Parley. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, looks like we're good to go. The value of our democracy is fading. We started off as a political pioneer, but these days the only thing our country can claim to be the best at is underrepresenting our constituents and silencing their voices. But it's because this bill only entrenches these systemic problems that you negate. Up until this point, literally every speech in this round, from Senator Puthumana to Senator Subramaniam, has battled over whether voter ID laws reduce turnout. I want to settle the score once and for all. Don't look at the singular studies that Senators A or Josephy give you. Look to a 10-study meta-analysis by the Government Accountability Office in 2014 that firmly concludes voter ID laws did not reduce turnout among Americans. Senators Josephy, Sagrolikar, and A, you're right, some Americans don't have IDs, but as Senator Pontes has already explained, every polling booth offers exceptions. But I also have a hard time believing Senator Williams on my own side, who tells us that voter ID laws reduce fraud. Well, the same NBER study that you cite finds that voter ID laws actually did not affect fraud whatsoever. So if in practice, voter ID laws don't decrease turnout or fraud, what exactly are they doing? Well, their real importance comes down to how they're perceived by voters. The Harvard Business School writes in March of 2020 that whether or not the laws are actually doing their job, the fact that they even exist makes Americans feel more confident in the integrity of our elections. It's kind of like the nightlight in our childhood bedroom. It doesn't really do anything, but it makes people feel safer. Senator Puthumana, you tell us about the flaws with voter ID laws, like unjust voting regulations in certain states. Let's use our congressional power and legislative ability to fix them, but removing them outright just dismantles trust in the American voter base. So what is the harm in people not trusting our elections? Well, bottom line, a democracy can only function when all people are represented. And Senators Puthumana and A, although you claim that voter ID laws reduce minority turnout, I've already shown you that's not true. In fact, the confidence they give to some voters actually increases turnout. Carrie Wu, a professor of sociology at New York University, finds in November of 2020 that a higher level of trust in our civic processes has been associated with a higher level of voter turnout in every election in the last 80 years. Senator A, if we dismantle trust, we decrease turnout. We're the United States Congress. I really hope that I don't have to elaborate on why it's important to elect leaders that actually represent their constituents. Because at the end of the day, those leaders and our institutions derive their power from the people. But if the people don't trust those institutions to put good leaders in power, then they will stop engaging with those institutions. And the second they stop engaging with our institutions is the second democracy begins to crumble. Because the pillars of democracy rest on the shoulders of citizens who trust in its integrity. It is because today's legislation erodes that trust and shatters those pillars that you fail.
Thank you for that speech time of 3 minutes. Questioners, please raise your placards. Of those standing, it's going to go to Senator Golombek.
Hi.
Hi, Senator. So on a state-by-state basis, whenever this discrimination does in fact occur, does that not decrease confidence in the election as well?
I give you a 10-study meta-analysis that finds that it didn't.
Well, a 10-study meta-analysis is about the overall net of the entire country.
Yeah,
but what
and
about
who votes? And the entire country votes in our elections, no?
Are you denying the fact that there is any discrimination?
Wait, Senator, I'm telling you, okay, so elections are nationwide, right? If nationwide there's no decrease in turnout, then the affirmation's points are moot.
A net study of the entire nation can't show that. And don't you believe that some
Okay,
discrimination?
We're moving on to Senator Kulkarni.
Hi, Senator. Just a simple yes or no question. Does it cost time and money to get a voter ID?
I don't think we can boil it down to that simple of a yes or no question. As a matter of fact, as Senator Pontus has already explained, even if you can't, even in your case scenario, there's still exceptions that are offered at the polling booth. And guess what? Those same booths help you get that ID.
Okay, so let's talk about those exceptions for a second. In the state of Texas, to get an exception, I have to provide several legal documents.
And Senator, guess what? I'm willing to legislate a solution.
Other things that are much harder to obtain than a voter ID.
And Senator, as a Congress,
elapsed, you may be muted. All right, we're now looking for a speech in the affirmation. All those on the F. Senator Golombek.
I thank the chair for the reference to the judges in the chamber. My name is Senator Golombek, speaking on the affirmation of today's legislation. And the second time in today's session. I'll be using my phone as a timer. Following Reconstruction within Southern American society, powerful legislators wanted to block the suffrage of the newly freed African Americans through poll taxes. It's not 1890 anymore. Now it's the 21st century. And yet we're seeing an entity extremely similar to those poll taxes still plaguing the lives of millions within this nation. We fight those and we affirm. We affirm to stamp out state governmental racism. Now, time and time again within this legislation, on both the affirmation and negation, we've heard about the discrimination towards people of color. But understand, all of those discussions have been on a nationwide basis. For example, Senator Gu discussed a net change in the amount of voter turnout across the entire nation. But we can't look at it in that way. We have to look state by state. So Senator Williams claims that it is just common sense for a correct photo ID law to be there. But understand, it would be common sense if that law was the exact same from state to state. But the fact is that it's not. In reality, every single state has different voter ID laws, and they have been proven to be discriminatory, Senator Pontes. So even if on a national basis, the net change in voter turnout does not change whatsoever, we have literal facts to show that this discrimination is occurring. For example, we find that in multiple different states, such as Texas, they are extremely discriminatory in what IDs they allow and what IDs they don't allow. Another state would be North Carolina, where they specifically struck down forms of ID to target POC voters with surgical precision, according to The Guardian. Specifically, they would not allow forms of ID that high numbers of African-American voters had, while enabling forms of ID that white voters had. So it's not a nationwide case. We have to examine this state by state. And now Senator Subramanian claims that it's a problem with today's legislation because we're adding more power to the federal government. Understand that with today's legislation, that would actually be a benefit, because as I've shown, in every single state, there's their own separate forms of discriminatory forms of legislation, and those forms of legislation provide too much power to state governments to enact their racist wishes, similar to the poll taxes of local legislators in the 1890s. And so understand, by ensuring that it is a constant federal plan from state to state with today's legislation, we fight that discrimination. Secondly, understand that the fact is that with today's legislation, I apologize. I got it. Thank you.
Thank you for that speech time of 2 minutes and 40 seconds. All questioners, please raise your placards. All right, we're going to go with Senator Subramaniam.
Hello, Senator. Can you elaborate on why Congress should have the power to govern state elections to elect themselves?
Because of the fact that state governments have proven time and time again to show discriminatory practices in how they enact these policies. When we do it on the federal government, we streamline it from state to state nationwide.
Doesn't this infringe on state powers?
No, because of the fact that state powers have used those powers incorrectly. And besides, a national federal election should occur with a national legislation.
What will be the impacts of setting a precedent of ignoring the constitutional precedent?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
What will be the impacts of ignoring the Constitution?
We're out of time. We're moving on to Senator Gu.
I just want to make sure I got my facts straight, right? So in Texas, your issue is that they're restricting like the kind of ID that you can bring?
Yes.
Okay, so why don't we expand the availability of acceptable ID nationwide rather than removing it? Like, why isn't that a better?
Because we've shown time and time again that ID has no impact on any form of fraud whatsoever.
I actually agreed with you. I told you, but the fact that we have those laws in place increases the confidence of Americans in our elections.
I believe that the confidence of Americans will be increased if we stop any form of discriminatory practice.
That's fine, but my Harvard Business School study begs to differ.
Time has elapsed. All right, we're now in line for free speech and the negation. Negation, please raise your placard.
Motion?
Yes, Senator Pontes.
I move to previous question.
Seconds? Any opposed? Seeing none, assuming unanimous consent, that is so ordered. All right, same thing with voting procedure. Placards up when I call your side, put them down when I call your name. So affirmation, raise your placards, please. I see Senator A, Senator Sagrolikar, Senator Puthumana, Senator Josephy, Senator Kulkarni, and Senator Golubeck. That's 6. All those in the negation, please raise your placards. Senator Williams, Senator Subramaniam, Senator Gu, Senator Lee, Senator Pontes. That is 5. So on a ballot of 6-5, today's legislation fortunately does pass. Right? Are there any other motions? I'm going to caution the chamber. We can probably get the rest in if we keep it short, or not at all. All right, so seeing no motions, we're just going to continue on with the last few speeches and move on to the next bill, which concerns the bill of the elderly. All right, are there any authorships? Any sponsorships? Senator Kulkarni, you're recognized.
Hi guys, this is Senator Kulkarni once again, speaking for the second and final time in today's chamber. Any indication from the judges? Actually, I've pinned the presiding officer. If the PO could just tell me when the judges are ready. Awesome. As a member of this Congress, my responsibilities to my constituents range from the youngest to the oldest. And yet, when our elders are the ones being most affected in this time of destruction in COVID, it's imperative that we pass my legislation today. But first, I want to take a two-pronged approach to explaining how we can improve the life for elders under passage. We should focus on both improving the absolute quality of caretakers and increasing the amount of them. In fact, let's look to the problems in the status quo. The NBC reports in March of 2021 that 30% of nursing homes face shortages, which is made much worse because of COVID. An increased turnover and burnout due to COVID-19 means that the next generation of care workers is also depleted, and this problem is only going to get worse. CNBC further quantifies in April of 2019 that the US elder care industry will need 5.2 million new jobs by 2026, which will cost the United States economy $480 billion. However, the problem with these shortages means that taking care of aging parents falls to families who lack the time and training to do it adequately, and forcing people to opt for nursing homes instead of home care. Passing today's legislation provides the perfect solution. A July 2021 Scientific American report explains that most people simply cannot afford a nursing home, and Medicare only pays 70 to 80% for the poorest Americans. The result is that there needs to be more focus on increasing the supply to lower wages and also making sure that we target people more into this role. In fact, a Paraprofessional Healthcare Institute quantifies in June of 2018 that 47% of home care workers are low income and 54% receive public assistance with some of the highest turnover in the nation. This means that they are uniquely vulnerable to the cost of tuition and need assistance more so than other professions. Passing today's legislation and giving that assistance would massively incentivize more people to enter the field. However, if we don't, families will be forced to send their aging loved ones to nursing homes or to take care of them without special care, leaving them ripe for abuse. The American Journal for Geriatric Psychiatry elaborates in January of 2021 that elder abuse rose to 1 in 10 elders during the pandemic, an 84% rise, largely because of familial neglect and declining nursing home quality. Without today's legislation, we risk more and more elderly Americans being abused and neglected in broken systems. We have the ability to foster a new generation of workers built upon mutual care. Let's service our duty to those who came before us and pass this legislation.
Thank you for that speech time of 3 minutes. All those who'd ask a question, please raise your placards. All right, of those standing, it's going to go first to Senator A.
Thank you. All right, Representative, I champion your worry about the elderly, but is it fair to pay such a little wage to the people that do such tremendous work when they take care of them?
All right, so if your problem is that we're paying too little, I'd say that this legislation provides more than it doesn't. Because if we fail today's legislation, we leave care workers in the status quo, which is objectively worse.
So, but still, they don't get paid enough so they have to work multiple works, so they won't take as good a care of the elderly as they should if they could have just working only one.
Better than if we do nothing.
Roll a card.
Are certifications required to work at most elderly care facilities?
I'm pretty sure it's mostly paid helpers like social workers.
For the nurses and social workers, yeah, but for general care, no, right?
Sure, let's say that it isn't.
Okay, so what's the incentive for a worker to get certification through the grant when they're already paid so little?
Well, the idea of the grant for certification means that those who want to get certified and work more in the medical field professionally have the ability to do so.
Moving on to Senator Josephine.
So this bill gives about $8,000 a year to future care students, right? Like people who are in education but want to get into this, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So these people tend to graduate with, hundreds of thousands in debt, right? Like pretty large amount of
the school debt crisis.
Why is this bill how is the $8,000 a year in this bill going to incentivize people to enter this profession as opposed to much higher paying ones like doctors or nurses that would be able to
first, they're already in care programs when we give them the grant. So their end goal is already in this type of care industry. When we give them the grant for specifically elder care, it incentivizes them to move further.
I thank the chair. Senator Kulkarni, building off of what Senator Josephy said, Wouldn't doctors not actually be going into the field of primary care as they might specialize in, say, going into residency for whatever specialty they may?
There's a difference. There's like several medical like professions, each requiring a different school. So we're giving money specifically to those going into care works like as an industry.
Does this grant provide for a doctor, say, for all like 8 years of their medical school plus their residency plus maybe even an optional fellowship?
Well, that's for a doctor, like a doctorate degree. We're not necessarily looking at those people. We're looking more towards the nursing path and
Are we looking at
a
those
shorter
people
educational
designated
time.
as some of the people we're providing the grant to, though?
I didn't hear the beginning of your question.
All right, you can ask the question again. You have the other block.
Or okay, aren't these people all actually yield to Senator?
Okay, Senator Pontes, you can have the last block.
This bill allocates $4,000 grants to care workers, right?
To future care workers.
Right. Elderly care workers make very little and have, on average, $90,000 in debt. Are these measly grants really an incentive?
Yes. I mean, if you're a care worker already enrolled in care classes, knowing that you're coming out with debt, any money will help you in the long term.
But this is an incentive to get more people enrolled, not just help the people already enrolled, right?
Well, it does both. That's the idea. So we may help people who are already enrolled.
Questioning time has elapsed. Speaker in question may be muted. I'm sorry, I misspoke in the chat. We're not ending at 4:30. We're ending at 5. I was just miscounting time. So I think we're good to move on, though. So I'm going to call for all those in the negation. Please raise your placards. Right, of those standing, it's going to go first to Senator Subramanian.
I thank the chair. Hello, everyone. My name is Senator Tara Subramaniam, and this will be my last time speaking this session. I'll assume my judges are ready unless they interrupt me. Awesome. Senators, imagine sending your grandma to an elderly care facility. You're trusting the people working there with her life, only to walk in and see that those workers, frankly, don't care about their jobs and about your grandma. This is the reality our constituents will face with the passing of this bill. Senators, by passing, you don't support the elderly population, you doom their sunset years to a living nightmare. First, passing leads to exploitation. We can see a similar situation in what will happen to students in this bill to the H-1B visa program, where people are forced to work in order to keep their homes. According to the Economic Policy Institute in 2017, H-1B workers are often exploited and arrive in debt, and they're tied to their employers. This is a similar situation to the situation these students will be in. They will be coming into these jobs full of debt, since $4,000 per semester doesn't even scratch the surface for most college tuitions, and they will be tied to their employers to finish these 5 years so that they can get on with their lives and careers. Senator Kulkarni tells us that this legislation is the best option to resolving the home care shortage. However, the shortage is already solving itself. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor predictions from 2019 to 29, it expects home health and personal care aides, which mainly consist of elderly care, to grow more than any other job. This feeling of obligation under this bill is likely to lead to resentment of the people these students are caring for because of the burnout of such an intense job that they have to stick to, since leaving the job means increasing their student loans. Senator Kulkarni mentions declining nursing home quality as a large factor of abuse, but today we are worsening nursing home quality by increasing worker resentment and burnout of the elderly they care for. Second, negate, because this bill preys on low-income students. People will join the program for the loan and not for their passion towards the job. This means that the people will go into debt and we still won't be fixing the shortage problem. According to the real-time report in 2020, the number of people over age 65 was 43 million in 2012. It'll hit 84 million in 2050. This dramatically increases the demand for social workers. Far fewer people can rely on family members for care, and the elderly have far more health-related and mental health issues than the young. This makes it essential for social workers to have interventions for promoting health in an aging population and have the expertise to deal with issues like dementia and isolation. If those who don't take the grant do decide to continue for the minimum 5 years, who take the grant continue to decide for the minimum of 5 years, they most likely won't be actively wanting to be at work because they're forced to be there. Though they may get their tasks done, they will only be doing it to make the money. A job like this requires people to be fully invested as they are dealing with people with mental incapabilities, which takes a lot of patience and hard work, and most importantly, passion. Negate.
Thank you for that speech time of 3 minutes and 5 seconds. Questioners, please raise your placard. All right, if they're standing, it's going to go to Senator Lee.
Hi, Senator. So why exactly is there an increase in the number of these care workers if the job is so demanding?
Well, because more people are having a passion for it.
Isn't it actually because the industry will become more lucrative as there's an increase in the aging population?
Sure.
Isn't a more lucrative career helpful to these care workers to offset their educational costs in the future?
If you don't have a passion for your job, you're not going to like that job.
Yeah, but under today's legislation, we're helping offset these educational costs, right?
No.
Next, Senator Joseph.
Just minimally.
So this bill targets, people in doctoral or nursing programs, right? Yes.
Yeah.
Right. And those are pretty lucrative careers, right? Especially given how much debt they incur when studying.
Yeah.
So if you're saying that this will attract people to nursing careers by just an $8,000, per year salary, why wouldn't people instead just go to, becoming a doctor or a nurse, because that objectively pays more?
Exactly. So there's two scenarios that might happen. In one, low-income students are exploited, and in the other, nobody even has this grant. So the shortage that the affirmation mentions.
Senator Golovac.
Hi, Senator. So within your speech, you claim that the industry is already fixing itself, and that would be true in the normal status quo. But is it not true that the elder population, specifically the baby boomers, are growing day by day?
I stated that in my speech, yes.
But then
I also stated how this bill doesn't help that situation.
How would it not help the workers that are being continuously overwhelmed with that population growth?
Because there's two scenarios. In one, nobody takes the job because there's more lucrative options. In the other, the people who take the job resent the job.
Make this option more lucrative.
Senator Puthumani.
I thank the chair. Senator Subramaniam, so if you're saying we shouldn't advocate for providing more caregivers into the flow to help the elderly, what is the ultimate solution to this elderly care crisis?
I'm not saying we shouldn't advocate for care. We should develop a plan that doesn't force people to work a job they don't love.
Then how are we going to get caregivers if this job isn't even appealing in the first place?
We should try to increase the amount. The real problem is how much people get paid at these jobs. So the solution is to increase how much they get paid.
Questioning time has elapsed. All right, that was a speech in the negation. All those in the affirmation, please raise your placards. Senator, oh, okay, I see two people now. It's going to go to Senator Lee first.
Thank you, Chair. This is Senator Lee speaking for the second and final time in this legislative session. Could the judges please give me an indication of when they're ready, and I'll be happy to begin. Perfect, perfect, perfect. Perfect. This past year, my mom was tasked with the impossible task of convincing my grandpa to enter into a care home. He argued adamantly that he would be bored and no one would be able to take care of him. For me, Senator Subramaniam, your dream is my reality. With an aging population on the rise, it is critical that we ensure there's adequate care for our constituents. Now, principally, pass today's legislation because it improves the mental health of senior citizens in elderly care homes. By passing today's legislation, we incentivize care workers to enter into the field of elderly care. This matters because by increasing just the care, we improve happiness. Statistics from the National Council on Aging state that those 85 years and older have the highest suicide rate for any age group. It is over 4 times higher than the nation's overall rate of suicide. Now, according to the National Institute of Health, to counteract this, high social support increases happiness among elderlies. Critically, the quality and quantity of social support were important determinants and predictors of happiness among elders. Today's legislation gives us the ability to not only incentivize new care workers into the industry, but we also give these care workers the ability to obtain a better education if they want it. Now, there really is nothing preventing them from leaving in the status quo. Senator Puthuma, but crucially, it is necessary that we get these future workers in the door in the first place. By increasing the quality and quantity of social support, we staff these homes with people who will help provide our 40.3 3 million elderly population with a safe environment for socialization and increased quality of life, where they can build social relationships with others, saving thousands of lives yearly. Now, second, today's legislation actually helps prevent the severity of future pandemics. The COVID-19 pandemic highlighted that our care system are vulnerable to pandemics and are hotspots for transmissions. More than 84,000 residents and staff of nursing homes and other long-term care facilities have died from COVID-19 across the United States, representing 40% of all coronavirus fatalities in the country. In California, the analogous toll is more than 5,700 deaths, making up 35% of all coronavirus fatalities in the States. By passing, you decrease the possibility of diseases spreading during the next pandemic. The University of California, Los Angeles, created maps of movements and found that on average, each nursing home is connected to 7 other staff movements. Limiting nursing home employees to one facility could mean fewer COVID-19 infections. By giving these workers an education grant of $4,000 per semester, will be offered to future care workers on the condition that they work 5 years in the field of elderly care. We decrease staff movement, giving them an incentive to stay. By giving an incentive for social workers to stay long-term at elderly homes, you decrease the possibilities of a disease spreading mass across elderly homes. Now, while I could always see a tear in my grandpa's eye when we left, I could see that he always knew that the facility was best for him. Today's legislation gives us the opportunity to send a message to our elderly population that going to these facilities is not as daunting as they seem.
Thank you. That was a speech time of 3 minutes and 11 seconds. All questioners, please raise their placards. Those standing, it's going first to Senator A. Actually, my apologies, Senator Subramania.
Hello, Senator. Is social support equivalent to care workers, or does it include social networks such as friends and family?
So yes, social support does include these other aspects, but critically, the statistic points to these social workers working at these care homes.
So can you tell me the exact statistics when it's specific to care workers?
The statistic I cited was specific to care workers.
Oh, I thought it was social support. Was it social support or care workers?
Care workers.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. You mentioned that a lot of care workers leave. Isn't this a large point contributing to resentment in care workers?
The point is we're trying to de-incentivize these care workers from leaving.
Next to Senator A.
Hi, Senator.
Hi. So, Representative, does today's piece of legislation actually actively help train workers when they will need to interact with elderly, or does it just provide an incentive for them to go?
So today's legislation provides them an incentive, and that incentive is the ability for them to get better training and better education to provide better care.
Legislation doesn't actually help for them getting
today's
better
legislation actually helps because it provides these 4,000 per semester grants, right?
They must have it. They just say it will have a grant.
Speaker and questioner may be muted. All right, we're now in line for a speech on the negation. All those in the negation, placards up, please. All right, of those standing, it's going to Senator Pontes.
Thank you. This is Senator Pontes speaking for the third and final time today. If I could get any indication that you guys are ready, I would be happy to begin. Great. Thank you. 1 year, Donald Wallace was a happy 75-year-old retiree. The next, he was found dead, lying in his own feces. The America we live in is an America where elderly care is more a dream than a reality. Maybe if it wasn't, Mr. Wallace wouldn't be sleeping forever, but he is. It is because this piece of legislation does absolutely nothing to help people like Mr. Wallace that we fail. First, fail today's legislation because pay, not student loans, deter elderly care workers. The main problem with this bill isn't exploiting students who enter the program, as Senator Subramanian spent her speech arguing. It's getting students to enter the program in the first place. Senator Kulkarni told you in questioning that stipends of $4,000 for student loans will incentivize workers to enter the industry, but that's just not true. Why? According to the Harvard Business Study on October of 2020, the problem is that the pay just isn't worth it for elderly care workers. The average family care worker makes about $20 an hour or $42,000 a year, less than almost any other medical specialty. $4,000 or a lifetime of better pay. Which would you choose? better pay, they would too. The financial advisor on February 11th of 2021 explains that by giving students $4,000 a semester in an industry where the average student loan balance is about $90,000, there is very little incentive to go into elderly care. But second, stand in the negation because it still won't increase access. Career Health on March 2nd of 2021 explains that solving the problem of healthcare workers doesn't even begin to address the larger issue. Most elders can't scrounge up enough money to pay for the absurdly high cost of elderly care. The average elderly care program costs more than $50,000 a year, with private rooms costing over $100,000. Times on February 15th of 2019 furthers that even worse, Medicare today doesn't cover a single penny, forcing 98% of Americans to go completely without elderly care. More workers is completely off base. Senator Kulkarni tells you that increasing workers will lower wages and then these people can pay for it. But it's an impossible loop. The pay is so low and debt so high, students won't join in the first place. Even if they do, our elderly can't afford the care that they will provide. Senator Lee, you don't get that impact of increased mental health or reducing the spread of diseases if care workers can't afford care. This legislation doesn't help our elderly on life support. It is time to pull the plug. Ultimately, this legislation has proven to be just like those who cared for Mr. Wallace, neglectful, incompetent, and ignoring the real problems with serious consequences.
Thank you for that speech time of 3 minutes and 9 seconds. Questioners, please raise your placards. Once again, all right, that's going to go first to Senator Kulkarni.
So your first entire point is based around the idea that 4,000 simply isn't enough, correct?
Right.
So can't that just be simply quite easily fixed by amending today's legislation?
Look, I'm telling you, this legislation isn't getting the impact that you're talking about. You on your own side are saying it's not enough, we need to amend it.
No. You're saying it's not enough. I'm saying that isn't that a solvable problem?
But the legislation as it stands doesn't provide enough incentive for workers to actually go into the industry.
It's not about is it enough. Does it provide an incentive?
No.
Hi, Senator. So you explained how the cost of elder care in itself is very expensive, but isn't that due to the limited job supply?
No, I'd argue it's because elderly care workers can't afford the high cost of elderly care, and Medicare and Medicaid don't subsidize it.
But is it not true that elder care in itself is more expensive because there's a limited number of workers to provide that care?
No, I'd argue it isn't. Even if you take that at its highest ground, this legislation doesn't increase the amount of workers in the industry because it's not an incentive enough. In both worlds, this legislation doesn't help.
Thank you. Questioning time has elapsed. You may be muted. Right now, we're looking for a speech in the affirmation. Those in the aff, please raise your placard. That's going to go first to Senator Williams.
Thank you, that's Senator Williams. I will begin unless somebody tells me not to. Perfect. I believe that this legislation should be passed almost immediately. I mean, come on. Why would anybody want my great-grandmother not to have a nurse? The case should be cut and dry, but the opposition wants to continue to push this narrative of the evil healthcare worker, and we need to dispel that rumor. First, we need to continue the conversation that, of course, there's a shortage, but why? We know that, yes, baby boomers continue to grow and retire, and we're seeing an unprecedented need for elderly care. But at the same time, like even the opposition have said, we're not supporting the workers who are doing said care. And we'll talk about how this legislation actually fixes that in a second. We know that from the proposition, and according to the American Association of Medical Colleges, by 2025, we'll have a shortage of over 100,000 elderly care doctors. We see the adverse effects. We know that there are so many harms. Hospitals in Iowa and Arkansas have been forced to stop taking new admissions altogether. Further reports show that half of healthcare workers leave the field every year, which causes a lack of stability. So how do we incentivize that? This legislation does. We'll talk about the funding later, but I want to go and dispel that rumor on elder abuse. The NIH has been reporting dropping cases of elder abuse since 2010. Senators have discussed that these employees are just terrible people, so let's help get more people into these careers and increase the quality of care. If we just allow the status quo to continue, we will never be able to solve these issues and our elder populations will suffer. The opposition's solution to elder abuse is just to let it continue. Senator Lee makes a great case that more and better workers will decrease mental health disparities in our elderly population. This legislation is just net better to supporting our healthcare workers. Instead of demonizing them and leaving them out to dry, let's support them, get them some help, relieve their stress and the stress of the elderly. And lastly, on the topic of wages. First, when we increase competition for the best healthcare workers, companies will raise their own wages. We're seeing it right now. The US has refused to raise the minimum wage, so companies are, in fact, doing it themselves in order to get the best workers. Further, in contrast with Senator Pontes, less student loan debt may encourage more workers to stay in their field until they can get raises to maintain their finances. If the average debt is only $90,000, $4K a semester for 4 years is $32,000, over a third. That's a huge relief for most Americans. We can see that this is enough of an incentive to at least start pushing more healthcare workers into the field and to give us more time to raise that wage if we need to. Join me in the proposition and voting for this legislation to support our elderly workers. We should not be subjecting them or the elderly to terrible conditions, and we must protect them. For that reason alone, I support this legislation.
Thank you for that speech time of 2 minutes and 47 seconds. Questioners, please raise your placards. Okay, of those standing, it goes first to Senator. Good.
So if elderly care workers are just leaving after 5 years, will they ever have time to get experience to be a good care worker?
I'm not, a healthcare worker or an expert, so I can't tell you how long it takes to get necessary experience.
Well, sure, but you would concede that novices have less experience and are more likely to be error prone, right?
Sure.
Right, and so doesn't that decrease the quality of care for elderly
If we put
individuals?
more in, then we just empirically have more workers. Statistically speaking, they'll be better.
It'll be quantity over quality. How does that work?
Quantity equals quality.
Moving on to Senator Pontes.
The need for elderly care is going up substantially, right?
Correct.
And yet 90% of elderlies can't afford it. Why would more workers mean we meet that need if 98% cannot afford it?
I would venture to guess that the elderly, the amount of elderly people who need into these programs is oversaturated, that, like I said, hospitals are turning them down. It's not about too many elderly, it's about not enough healthcare workers and not enough facilities.
Thank you. Questioning time has elapsed. You may be muted. All right, now we're looking for a speech in the negation. Negation, please raise your placards. Right, of those standing, it's going to go to Senator Upimana.
I thank the chair. If the chamber's in order, may I begin? And with that, I will begin. Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, I present Exhibit A, Her Royal Highness the Queen of England. At 95 and still going strong, she drinks a glass of whiskey nightly and literally cuts her birthday cakes with a sword. No, that's not a joke. But unfortunately, while the Queen may be the epitome of elderly, she doesn't actually represent the demographic within the US, who are frail, in need of help, and growing constantly in number. And that's exactly the problem that we have in our chamber today. No senator has truly identified what the elderly care crisis actually is. And it consists of multiple issues. It's not just the understaffing of nursing homes. It also consists of people, family members who have to take care of elderly members within their family. It also consists of what Senator Pontes mentioned in how Medicare and some of the Social Security aid that we give our elders isn't cutting it. So here are two reasons why we should negate this bill in favor of solving the elderly care crisis in other ways. First, the current generation has an overwhelming task in taking care of the elderly, and they're the people we should be helping financially. The Atlantic on July 15th, 2019 gives testimony from one of these individuals. Alexis Baden-Meyer put her house on Airbnb 3 years ago and moved with her husband and 2 kids into her parents' home in Alexandria, Virginia. Her mom, who has Alzheimer's disease, was no longer able to take care of her dad, who had suffered from heart failure. Quote, I didn't really have a good idea of what I was getting into, quite honestly, end quote. Baden-Meyer is one of 34 million people across the United States giving unpaid care to an older adult. often a family member. Most of these caregivers are middle-aged and most are women. And the cost of hiring a home health aide to take care of a frail patient can add up to $50,000, hence why they're unpaid and doing it for free. We as legislators shouldn't stop focusing on the issue that is truly harassing our elders, and that being their family members giving them care. We need to support them financially, not through this bill that by proxy helps care workers that might not even be interested in helping the elderly. And secondly, it doesn't solve the issues with affordability faced in medicine today. The Economic Policy Institute in December 2019 found that Americans 56 to 61 had a median balance of $21,000 in their accounts. That reflects 30 years of saving for these elders. According to The Atlantic, in July 2019, most people assume that Medicare will cover the type of long-term personal care older people often need, and it doesn't. And the average Social Security check can only make a medium-sized dent in the cost of this care. We're not truly caring for our elders with this bill. Senator Subramaniam and Senator Lee and Kulkarni continue to assume that our healthcare workers will go into elderly care. They will not. We should start treating our elders like royalty. We should start giving them the care that they deserve through their family members who know what their other elderly family members need. And thus, let's solve the elderly care crisis in other ways through failing this bill.
Thank you for that speech time of 3 minutes and 11 seconds. Questioners, please raise your placards. All right, if they're standing, it's going to go first to Senator Sagrolikar.
Let's quickly talk about incentives. Let's say we buy this argument that no new people are going to come into the pipeline. Why can't we just give the grants to students already wanting to go into the industry?
Well, if they're going into the
or
industry,
already
in the industry, so
like no, already in educational programs. Sorry.
That's what this bill does. I'm still confused by your question.
No,
but if they're going into elderly care while they're at the educational institute, obviously they have a passion for that and they should be deserved.
Yeah, you say there's no incentive for people to join the industry.
You have the next question.
Wait, so if families do not have time to take care of their elderly relatives, how does money solve that?
Money solves that because people are literally quitting their jobs. They're leaving their houses to go care for their elderly.
So
And
we're going to
people
give money to these people to quit their jobs to take care of their elderly.
Could you repeat the question?
So we're going to pay people money to quit their jobs to take care of their elderly.
No, we're going to tell these people that what you're doing is right. You're taking care of the elderly. Some of these people give up on the elderly.
But they literally don't have time, right? So where do they send them to?
They're doing it because they care about their family.
Speaker and questioner may be muted. Right, we're now in line for a speech on the affirmation. All those on the affirmation, please raise your placard. That's going to go to Senator Golubek, unopposed.
I thank the chair for the reference to the judges in the chamber. My name is Senator Golubek. Oh, and also I apologize for the abrupt ending to the last speech. My Chrome browser just like closed on me and my speech was just gone. But anyway, regardless, I fixed it now, so we're good. Yeah, so I'll be using my timer once more. Judges in chamber. Great. Within our society, care has consistently assumed the position of the forgotten issue in our political system. We have allowed the system to clearly become unmanageable. We have even prevented this service from being included within elderly benefits like Social Security. Today's legislation finally marks the point where this chamber acknowledges and helps to solve this issue. So first, we affirm because of a point not brought up by any senator within today's debate, the fact that most home healthcare workers are disproportionately minority women, specifically Black women, and affirming today would further support them and give them the help that they need so badly. The fact is that this grant money that many of these future care workers receive is a necessity to help them achieve higher levels of education, and specifically the beneficiaries of this money will be POC women and Black women. These are women that are often in more impoverished homes, more impoverished communities, in which any money is beneficial. Any money is needed to help them continue through their educational career and support themselves as well as their future education. The fact is that Senator Pontas brings up the point that this is not enough of an incentive, With this legislation, it will be an incentive to multiple people in multiple impoverished communities. And we can always fix that incentivization with an amendment that increases the amount that we're providing. And a research study conducted by the University of California, San Francisco states that as many as 19 million older Americans are expected to need this long-term health care. And the fact is that a large portion of the care workers are Latino women or Black women. And so the fact is that with today's legislation, we are directly providing the fiscal capital needed to support these women in their educational endeavors and their career endeavors. Secondly, today's legislation is necessary to give affordable care to the middle class. The fact is that the nature of our healthcare system means that either you have enough money to stomach the entire cost on your own, or you're poor enough to qualify for Medicaid. It does not help the people in the middle, the people of the middle class. And the fact is that 47% of men and 58% of women who are retirement age or older will experience the need, but to receive this care. But as other senators have stated, the vast majority cannot afford it. That's where this legislation comes in, because time on November 16, 2019 discusses the 76 million baby boomers that are creeping into the retirement age. And these people will need this legislation. The reason is because what this legislation will do, what Senator Pontus doesn't realize, is that by adding more demand for the industry, adding more care workers available, it dramatically drops the price of that care cost because there is more supply for that care and that's available. Therefore, the growing amount of baby boomers will therefore be supplied with today's legislation. Finally, let's address the claim that the care system is fixing itself, as Senator Subramanian brings up within her speech. The fact is that, as I already brought up, a massive amount of baby boomers are entering the retirement age. And so even if the care system is gradually increasing, it cannot supply that growth of retirees without today's legislation. We pass. Thank you.
Thank you for that speech time of 3 minutes and 11 seconds. Questioners, please raise your placards. Right, of those standing, first it's going to go to Senator Josephy.
So I want to ask you the same question that others have asked, the entire affirmation, right? Where we have this opportunity cost. Where on one hand, you can have doctors go and become care workers for the stipend, or on the other hand, you can have them go and, to normal doctor work. So what about this bill actually incentivizes medical workers to give up the much more—
Well, the medical workers that are going into the care industry are often people with nursing degrees. They're not people that are going for a medical degree.
They still make more money elsewhere, even with this bill?
Because a lot of people aren't incentivized to go down that route of a medical degree, which costs even more funds than what this legislation would provide.
Sorry, was that me?
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't hear that. If people of color need this money so much, doesn't this actually support my point that will lead to exploitation of these grant students because they're forced to find a job within 2 years of their degree that provides a wage?
If we look at the status quo, these people are already being exploited. It's often Black women of color who are in need of funds, but are still going down this road of nursing and care. This legislation would support them.
Exactly. So when they're tied to the employer, since they have to work in this job, wouldn't this lead to exploitation by the employers?
They already have to work in these jobs because of the immense poverty that many of the population—
They don't have to work in these specific jobs, right?
That's what they're going down the route for.
Maybe muted. All right, now we're looking for a speech in the negation. All those in the negation, please raise your placard. Though thinly, it's going to go to Senator A.
Thank you. This is Senator Affirmative speaking for the second time this legislative session. As always, at the leisure of everyone above me, any indication when you're ready, and I'll be happy to begin. Good. PO is ready? Awesome. As my own mother is a doctor, I believe that no healthcare worker can be evil. Yet, I believe that, unlike my mom, workers can be uninterested. Fail today's piece of legislation to put our elderly as priority number one. As it is known to our chamber, by 2030, 20% of Americans will be 65 or older. That is why you first fail, because it won't create a qualified workforce. As Healthline tells us in 2020, the Health Resources and Services Administration and the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services tells us that we must strategically plan for and support the creation of a robust, qualified workforce across settings through a coordinated interdisciplinary approach that includes scholarships, loan forgiveness, and clinical internships, as well as efforts to train professionals and direct the care workers who are already in the workforce. First, you failed today's piece of legislation because, unlike Senator Lee and Goldberg will tell you, it doesn't ensure that workforce will be properly educated. Rather, it will create an uneducated workforce that won't care about its elderly. And we can't allow that because our healthcare system is already unprepared for the complexity of caring for a population of older adults, a problem that has been magnified by the coronavirus pandemic. Moreover, fail today's piece of legislation because it doesn't fund the right institutions, something that no one mentions yet. Because the NPR tells us back in 2012, Congress and the administration should mobilize and fund the Centers for Disease Control Prevention and the state and local health agencies to make healthy aging an essential component of public health. The Department of Health and Human Services should ensure that public health efforts for old adults are aligned with those in healthcare community level services sectors at local, state, and federal level. Today's piece of legislation, today's debate focus should be the elderly, not the pay of the unhappy workers. Representative Kulkarni and Representative Williams would like you to believe that some pay is better than none. However, what they don't understand is that there isn't enough of an incentive for people to even join this workforce. Because as a strategy of training more generative specialists from all disciplines has been a total failure, with barely any change from even 2008 to now. The incentives and potential rewards of a professional career focused on the care of elderly adults have been insufficient to attract graduates who are frequently burdened with a substantial debt and are often uncomfortable with the complexity of care of this population. Senator Goldbeck, it is because the US healthcare system fails to adequately support the long-term care workforce that we fail. At this time, nursing home staff and the low-income and caregiver work, which is predominantly composed of people of color, are paid low wages with poor to no job benefits. Passing a legislation that will increase the pay and education is the only way out, but this isn't it. Congress and the administration, including HHS and CMS, should expand access to and palliative care for older adults. Today's piece of legislation should focus on the elderly. Access to such programs should be based on need instead of being tied to prognostic estimates. Fail because
Senator, speaking time has elapsed. That was a speech of 3 minutes and 12 seconds. All those who'd like to ask a question, please raise your placard. Right, of those standing, it's going to go to Senator Kulkarni first.
Hi, Senator. So these care workers are typically paid lower wages, correct?
yes,
And they come out of school with high amounts of debt.
that is correct.
So when we start giving them debt relief, doesn't that start to account for the low wages and the high amount of debt simultaneously?
Representative, when we put them in a situation, if they quit the job and they will have to pay this loan even more, there will be an even deeper debt. So that
What
means
causes
that
them to quit the job if they no longer
because
are
they
forced?
have to be at a lot of jobs because $4,000 isn't enough for them.
Thank you. When care workers apply for a job, do they generally have to go through a background check?
Usually they do, yes.
Are you sure? They actually don't.
Really?
So let's just go with this chain of logic now. If we make people go into educational programs with this grants, doesn't this automatically give them a background check through the school?
Yes, it does, Representative.
So doesn't that increase the security?
But Representative, it doesn't matter how secure they are. Uninterest and not in checking they don't correlate, Representative. Do you understand what I mean? Like, people won't care because they would be checked, right? Like,
yeah, but doesn't that, sorry. Yeah.
I think our PO is saying you are muted, I think, or something.
It's not muted, it's just the mic is gone.
I think the chair.
Were you guys not able to hear me? I'm seeing some no's, some yeses.
You're good now, but
okay.
I think when more than one person talks,
right. I'll try to speak louder, I guess, so I can speak over you guys. All right, so that was a speech in the negation. All those in the affirmation, please raise your placard.
Motion. Point of clarification, then a motion.
Sure.
Point of clarification to the parley. If we go into a previous question and then promptly wrap up due to time, are we allowed to do that or should we go to the full 5 o'clock? Okay, good to know. Okay, so I move to previous question then.
Are there any seconds? Any opposed? All right, I'm gonna call for division of the House because I see dissent. All those who'd like to move to previous question, please raise your placards. All right, I count Senator A, Senator Pontes, Senator Golombek, and Senator Josephy, as well as Senator Puthumana. That's 5. All those who are opposed, Senator Kulkarni, Senator Lee, Senator Sigrolakar, Senator Williams, Senator Subramanian, and Senator Gu. All right, 5 to 6. We have time for one more speech. We're going to go with it. That motion did fail. All right, I'm going to call for all those on the affirmation to please raise your placard. Once again, all those on the affirmation, please raise your placard. All right, seeing none, we're going to break cycle, go back to the negation. All those in the negation, please raise your placards. Senator Gu, unopposed.
Thank you very much. For the final time today, and presumably the last speech in today's session, that's Senator Gu, spelled G-U. Judges, please give me a thumbs up whenever y'all are ready to go. That'd be amazing. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Judge Fairbanks, I see you nodding, so I'm going to take that as an indication. This Congress always talks about creating a sound foundation for the next generation, but too frequently, we forget about the generation that did the same for us. The generation who tried their best to give us the best deserves equal effort from our part. It's because this legislation does the exact opposite that you fail. This policy is the definition of settling for the bare minimum because the elderly care crisis requires thorough attention, not a temporary fix like the one we offer today. First off, Senators Kulkarni and Golombek, you want to reward people pursuing degrees in the elderly care industry, but the Public Service Degrees Organization writes in August of 2020 that most people are drawn to the care industry precisely because it doesn't require college. Literally, if you go to care.com right now, you can get a certification to become a home health aide for only $800. Senator Kulkarni, this bill targets a demographic that doesn't even really exist. But Senators Kulkarni and Lee, that means the only students you attract are getting degrees in things that are totally unrelated to elderly care. And before you say that isn't a bad thing because we need more workers, if a business graduate is becoming a care worker with the expectation that they'll work for 5 years and then just become an investment banker, the only people harmed are the elderly themselves. I want to pick up where Senator Subramanian drops off and explain why this is harmful. Amy Ward Allen, an expert in the field of elderly care, explains in July 1st of 2018 that new elderly care workers have a higher risk of errors due to a lack of experience, but over time, they usually improve in skill level. My issue is that today's legislation cycles them out every 5 years, meaning that the workers never have the time to build up adequate experience and elderly patients suffer in a cycle of mistreatment. So Senator Williams, the solution you offer today worsens quality of elderly care. And when an elderly person's caretaker leaves after 5 years, the trauma they go through is incredibly tangible. The Journal of General Internal Medicine concluded in June of 2014 that the consequences are so severe that when a caretaker leaves, an elderly person is more likely to be hospitalized and 3 times more likely to die. Senator Lee, you say that we protect elderly health, but make no mistake, this bill endangers the elderly and victimizes the vulnerable. To every senator on the affirmation, even if we increase the number of care workers, if that care leaves elderly workers worse off than they began, you fail this bill. For so many elderly citizens, a caretaker is the closest thing they have to a family member. But today's legislation gives them a family member who's there solely for free cash, won't have the experience to provide adequate care, and will push their health to the brink when they leave after just 5 years. Good intentions don't always translate to good policy, especially when that policy translates to our constituents being on the verge of losing their lives. I only stand for real solutions in this Congress because our constituents, they don't deserve a half-hearted handout.
Thank you for that speech time of 2 minutes and 57 seconds. Questioners, please raise your placard to make a count. This is the last round. All right, of those standing, first we have Senator Golombek.
Hi, Senator. So I'm confused. You misinterpreted the legislation. It doesn't cycle them out after 5 years. It just says that they're required to work for at least 5 years.
I know, but Senator, let's be honest, right? Like a person who's getting a business degree isn't going to stay in the elderly.
Why would a person getting a business degree go? Wouldn't it be nursing degrees or things in that nature that would be going into care?
Right, and okay, and anyone who they know where the money is. The money isn't in elderly care industry. It's in private practice. That's where they're going to go after 5 years.
I mean, what statistics do you have to show that the money isn't in elderly care?
Because the entire affirmation incentive is giving
them why are there
money.
elderly care workers
That's
right
the
now?
entire affirmation incentive.
Senator Puthumana.
I thank the chair. Senator Gu, given that it says will be offered to future care workers, can we get rid of that scenario where an investment banker goes into elderly care?
Why? You literally just said future care workers, and if they go into elderly care, then they
care workers is following in section 2A being defined as nurses, social workers, and doctors. I wouldn't classify investment banker.
No, I said they're going to go into the care industry to reap the tuition subsidy, but then they're going to exit the industry, just like every other negation senator has proven.
Right, but isn't that just terribly inefficient, especially as a doctor?
It is. That's why we fail.
Time has elapsed. You may be muted. All right, seeing that we've exhausted debate time, I'm just going to move us towards previous question. All those who'd like to affirm today's legislation, raise your placards, please. I see Representative Senator Kulkarni, Sagrolikar, Lee, Golubeck, Williams. That's 5. All those who'd like to fail today's legislation, please raise your placards. Subramaniam, Senator A, Senator Josephy, Senator Puthulamuna, Senator Gu, and Senator Pontes. That is a ballot of 5 to 6. Today's legislation does indeed fail. All right, with that said, we've exhausted our docket. I'm going to call for an adjournment. Real quickly, before we leave, I want to congratulate all of you guys. We've got through 26 speeches and 64 questions. Many people got to give a third speech. Not everyone, though, unfortunately, but we did a lot of legislating today. I want to congratulate you all, and I wish you all good luck on what you guys have to come.
We did it! No one can go anywhere, even though we've been here for like a quarter of your lives at this point. Okay. The first thing I'm gonna do is talk to the judges real quick. Okay, that's the first thing I'm gonna do. I know Judge Henderson's like, no, I'm still here. All right, my judges, we got to do some logistical stuff, and then I have to keep all of you, but then the kids and I will do leadership stuff. So we're gonna do checks number of speeches real quick before you get score in and rankings. So with the exception of Subramaniam, Pontes, Golubeck, and Gu, who have 3 speeches, everyone else, including the presiding officer, you scored for 2. Correct? Fairbanks says yes. Owen says yes. Henderson says yes. Perfect. And my 2 last reminders from tab, the number 1 is with the presiding officer. If so worthy, make sure you consider them in your rankings. And then the biggest, like whatever your favorite color is, neon, is that you have to get your ranks in as soon as you can. Because I also have to sit in this room with you until you have turned them in. So you can do comments and whatnot until the tournament ends, but rankings, your top 8 need to be in as soon as possible. Perfect. With that, yeah, so you all will stay here. The rest of you, thanks so much. I never get out of tab, and I was like, I will get out of tab to watch Congress, and it was totally worth it. So thank you for that. The last thing that we all need to do before you can get on out of here is we need to do leadership voting. Okay. Is there anyone who needs me to clarify anything on like what leadership voting is and or what this is going towards? Hopefully your prelims partly did that. I'm just going to go off of, yeah, perfect. Senator A and Senator Kulkarni, who gave me like some response, so perfect. I think we're good there. With that being said then, when you log into tab room, it should be the first thing that you see. You probably saw it last night. Hopefully you didn't fill it out then. All right, so as soon as you go in, you rank your top legislators, which can be you, right, if you're feeling yourself today. As soon as you've done that, then you can leave. If I'm a teacher, you don't leave until you're done. Then you can just be like, goodbye, and I'll be like, goodbye. But I'll be silent until then.
You said leave once we finished, right?
Yes, you're good. Bye. And then Judge Fairbanks, if your ranks are submitted, you're good to go. Bye. Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
Good
you,
session,
judges.
everyone.
Thank you, judges and competitors. This was really fun.
Yeah, thank you guys for judging.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, until next time.
All right. Thank you, judges. Nice spending
Bye.
5 hours with you.
Thank you.
Never got that story. All right. Bye.
Thanks, Brittany.
You're welcome. Okay, so with that, Michelle was like, I also have to stay, but now you're here. So my answering, and so are Fairbanks. So do you need anything from me?
No.
Okay. Okay, bye.
Bye.
We'll do, nope.